Late in the second season of Gravity Falls, there is a moment where Stanley Pines forgets his own name. He sits in his chair, blanket over his shoulders, and looks at his own brother like he is looking at a stranger. The show treats it as quiet, the way a confession is quiet when there is no one left to confess to. Underneath that quiet sits every secret the show ever buried, every cipher in the credits, every triangle hiding in the wallpaper, every six-fingered handprint pressed into a glass case in the woods, every conspiracy the town of Gravity Falls is built on. Tonight we are going through all of it, from the founding lie to the Axolotl, from the journals to the Society of the Blind Eye, the deals, the leaks, the moments the show only ever let itself half say. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, blanket up, we will be here a while. And if you have not yet subscribed to Pine Hat, it genuinely does help us keep making these. We have to start with the shack, because everything else is just a confession the shack was trying not to make. From the very first episode, when the twins arrive in a battered car driven by a man they barely know, the mystery shack is already lying to them. The sign on the roof has a letter that flickers and sometimes falls off, leaving the word reading as mystery hack. And the joke seems harmless until you realize the show has just told you, in its very first beat, that the man running this place is a hack pretending to be a mystery. The exhibits inside are stitched together fakes. The jackalope is taxidermy with antlers glued on. The sascrotch is an arrangement so cheap it is almost art. The tour patter is brazen lies told with the confidence of a man who has been telling lies for decades. The show plays it as a joke because that is what good magicians do. They hide the trick by making you laugh. But everyone who has watched the show all the way through knows what is actually under the mystery shack. There is a basement, there is a sub-basement under the basement, there is a vending machine that swings open onto a staircase, and at the bottom of the staircase there is a machine the size of a cathedral, humming in the dark, waiting. The whole tourist trap, the whole flickering sign, the whole cheap routine, it was all camouflage for what was underneath. The shack is not just a fake, it is fake on purpose, designed to look so disreputable that no government car would ever bother stopping for it. Stan Pines built a roadside attraction as a kind of magic trick, and the trick was not the unicorn skull glued together from antlers. It was the portal in the basement his brother had been pulled into 30 years before. Once you see it that way, every gag in the show changes. The 8-ball in Stan's desk drawer, the questionable taxidermy, the constant fundraising, none of it is comic relief. It is the cost of keeping the lights on in a building whose real purpose is to bring a missing man home. The shack is not a tourist trap. The shack is a search party that has lasted 30 years. To understand why the shack exists at all, you have to understand the twins it was built around, and the original Gravity Falls conspiracy, the one that predates Bill, predates the journals, predates the town itself, the question of who Stan Pines actually is. The show holds this back for a very long time. For most of the first season, you are told, indirectly and directly, that the gruff old man taking care of Dipper and Mabel is their Grunkle Stan, their great-uncle Stanford, the proprietor of the Mystery Shack and a small-time grifter. You are encouraged to roll your eyes at him and love him at the same time. He sells overpriced snow globes. He shoves his nephew off a roof to chase a pterodactyl. He keeps a tally of how many times he has been arrested. And then, in a single episode in the second season that the show titled with brazen honesty, you find out that he is not Stanford at all. He is Stanley. The man you have been watching for nearly 2 seasons is wearing his brother's identity, his brother's house, his brother's reputation, like a coat he never took off. The brother whose name he uses, Stanford, has been on the other side of a portal in another dimension for 30 years. The entire Mystery Shack, every bad pun, every flickering letter, every grift, every con, was Stanley's increasingly desperate front for the work he was doing in the basement to bring his brother back. The reveal in the episode titled, Not What He Seems, is one of the most beautifully buried twists in any animated series, because it recontextualizes every line of dialogue that came before it. The grumpy old man saying he never wanted kids around. The way he holds the journal he took off Dipper as if it weighs more than a book should. The way he stares at the photograph behind the desk. He is not playing a part for the tourists. He is playing a part for his great-niece and nephew, because if he ever told them the truth, he might also have to admit it to himself. It is not just that Stan stole his brother's identity, it is that he kept stealing it, every day, for 3 decades, because the alternative was telling the world he had failed. That failure goes back further than the show ever lets you watch in real time, all the way to a basement workshop in Glass Shard Beach, New Jersey. where two boys grew up sharing one bunk bed and a single dream, and where one of them, by accident or by design depending on which brother you ask, broke the other brother's school science project the night before it was meant to win him a scholarship. The episode, A Tale of Two Stans, is the show's longest single confession. It is a flashback that spans decades and explains, in the show's own quiet way, why both of these men became who they became. Stanford was the gifted one, born with a polydactyly that the show treats as both a literal physical fact and a quiet symbol for being different. He was the one their father pinned the family's future on. Stanley was the other one, the one who threw punches and got into trouble and loved his brother more than anything in his life. The night before Stanford's scholarship presentation, something in the workshop got knocked over, his perpetual motion machine got damaged, and Stanford's chance at his dream university disappeared with it. The father blamed Stanley. The father threw him out of the house. And there it is. The original Gravity Falls conspiracy is a small one, a domestic one, no triangles in it at all. It is one brother accidentally or intentionally ruining the other brother's life, and never quite being forgiven for it. Everything else, the portal, the journals, the mystery shack, the 30-year absence, the swapped identity, the apocalypse, grows out of that one cracked perpetual motion machine in a New Jersey garage. The show argues, very gently, that the supernatural is sometimes just the shape a family wound takes when given enough time and space to grow. That brings us to the journals, because the journals are the next conspiracy, and they are also the engine of the entire show. There are 3 of them, identical leather-bound notebooks marked on their covers with a gold hand, 6 fingers, and a numeral. They are the work of one man, Stanley Pines, and they are the record of the months and years he spent in Gravity Falls cataloging the impossible. Each one was hidden by him before he disappeared into the portal, hidden separately, in different places in the woods and in the town, with a kind of paranoid logic that only made sense from the inside of his head. The journals are layered. On the surface, they are field notes, an explorer's log, written in a tight, careful hand. Just underneath, they are evidence of a mind unraveling, because as you read forward through them, the entries get tighter and more anxious. The warnings get bigger. The references to a triangular figure with one eye begin to scatter through the margins, until by the end, the writer is scrawling warnings like, "Trust no one," in the corners of his own diagrams. And the deepest layer is that the journals are written in code. Not one code, but many. Caesar shifts, substitution ciphers, @bash, a 1Z26, Visioneer, invisible ink that only appears under black light, pages that are blank until you hold them up to a flame. The whole physical book is a maze, and it is a maze designed by a man who was rapidly figuring out, page by page, that the entity he had been collaborating with was reading over his shoulder. The journals are the original Gravity Falls conspiracy made flesh and paper. They are the part of the show you can hold in your hands. They are also the literal MacGuffin of the entire plot, because everything Dipper does, every adventure he stumbles into, every moment of bonding with his sister and his uncle, traces back to the second of the 3 journals landing in his lap on the floor of a hidden cabin in his first hours in town. The journals were never lost. They were placed. The show implies, and the supplementary material later confirms, that the second journal in particular was put exactly where a curious 12-year-old boy might find it. By whom, and for what purpose, is a question the show keeps in shadow for a very long time. Once you know who wrote the journals, you start to ask what they were really for, and the answer the show gives, the one that floats just behind every page, is that the journals were a love letter. Not a romantic love letter, a scientific one. They were the diary of a man who had finally found a place where his mind could breathe, where his extra finger on each hand was not a curiosity but a key, where the woods made noises at night that confirmed every secret suspicion he had ever had about the world being bigger than the people around him said it was. And then they became something else, a warning. Stanford had been pushed deeper into research by the encouragement of a single benefactor, a benefactor he met in his dreams, a benefactor who called himself a muse, who appeared to him in the form of a yellow triangle with one eye. The journals become a record of that relationship souring. The deepest layer of the journal mystery is that the journals contain, somewhere in their pages, the instructions for the only weapon in the universe that could be used against the muse, and that Stanford did not realize he was writing those instructions down, even as he was being watched. He was hiding a knife in his own diary, in a code so good that the entity helping him write the diary could not see what it was. That is the kind of plot mechanism Gravity Falls runs on, layer beneath layer, each layer disguised as the layer above it, until you can no longer tell whether you are looking at a children's mystery cartoon or at a quiet study of paranoia. The muse is Bill Cipher, and Bill Cipher is the only character in Gravity Falls you could remove and have the entire show collapse around him. He is a yellow triangle with a top hat, a bow tie, a single eye in the center of his face, and a voice somewhere between a carnival barker and a child laughing at something it should not have noticed. He shows up first in a dreamscape episode where Stan's mind is the haunted house, and the show plays him as a comic relief threat for almost an entire act before tipping its hand and letting you see what he actually is. He is the architect of everything wrong in Gravity Falls. He is the reason Stanford built the portal. He is the reason the journals were burned. He is the reason for the rifts and the eye bats and the apocalypse and the statue in the woods. According to the show itself, and according to the writers afterwards, he is much older and much stranger than the show was ever able to tell you on screen. Bill is not a Gravity Falls creature at all. He is a refugee. He comes from another dimension entirely, a flat, two-dimensional plane that the show calls the second dimension. And he came to this dimension because, in his own words, his home dimension was burning. Hirsch has said in interviews, and the show implies very strongly, that Bill is responsible for that burning, that he is a refugee from a fire he started, the way a man might burn down a house and then arrive on his neighbor's doorstep covered in ash and asking to stay. The show never directly shows you the second dimension on the main series, but the supplementary book that came out after the show ended, the one that fans now treat as a kind of Bible, fills in a great deal of the backstory in a register that the show itself never quite had room for. According to that material, Bill was once a being who could see only flat shapes, and he convinced his entire two-dimensional world that the third dimension existed as a kind of paradise, and led them to a kind of mass cult event in which most of them died, including, by some accounts, his own parents. You can decide for yourself how much of that you want to fold back into the cartoon itself, because that material is canon to the writers, but it was published outside the run of the show, and on screen the show keeps Bill's biography deliberately vague. What is canon on screen is this: Bill exists in dreams. Bill can possess living minds if they shake his hand and give him permission. Bill traffics in deals, always deals, never simple violence, because the deal is how he gets his way past the boundaries of consent that the rules of his existence appear to require. He is a kind of nightmare lawyer. He came to Stanley Pines in dreams, when Stanford was a young researcher in Gravity Falls, presented himself as a muse, told him he had been chosen to do work too important for ordinary minds, and walked him, step by step, into building the interdimensional portal that would let Bill physically enter our reality. None of Stanford's brilliance was ever entirely his own. The breakthroughs that came to him in the woods, the equations that fit together too perfectly, the insights that arrived like gifts, were planted in his mind by Bill, so that Bill could build, by remote control, the machine he needed. Bill is not just a villain. He is the show's idea of what it looks like when ambition listens to the wrong voice. The portal that nearly destroyed Stanford's life was not built by Stanford. It was built through him. Once you see the portal as Bill's idea rather than Stanford's, the geography of the entire show rearranges itself. The Mystery Shack is sitting on top of the portal. The portal was almost finished when Stanford realized what it was for and tried to shut the project down. He confided in his friend Fiddleford McGucket, the brilliant engineer who had come to Gravity Falls at Stanford's request. McGucket helped him test the portal, fell into it for a moment, saw something on the other side that broke him, and pulled himself back. The portal was disassembled and hidden. The journals were scattered. Stanford reached out to the only person in the world he thought he could trust with the truth, which was his estranged brother Stanley, the brother he had not spoken to in 10 years. He sent Stanley a postcard, asking him to come and to bring something. Stanley arrived. They fought. In the fight, Stanford was pushed into the portal he had built and disappeared. And Stanley, who had spent 10 years of his life sleeping in cars and getting beaten up by collectors he could not pay, found himself in a house in the woods with 3 half-journals each, a deactivated portal, and a brother who was, as far as he could tell, dead. So he did the only thing he could think of. He took his brother's name. He took his brother's house. He started a roadside attraction to pay the bills and to keep the government away. And he started, slowly and secretly, the work of figuring out how to bring his brother back. That whole arc is the next layer of the original mystery, the one underneath the swapped identity, the one underneath the journals. The entire Mystery Shack era is the story of two brothers trying to reach each other across a gap one of them helped tear open, and the other one has spent his life pretending does not exist. While Stan was running the shack, somebody else in town was trying to forget. That somebody was Fiddleford McGucket, the same brilliant engineer who had peered into the portal and recoiled. The show introduces him as Old Man McGucket, the town crank, a barefoot lunatic who lives in a junkyard and shouts about doom in the supermarket. For most of the first season, he is a sight gag. What happened to him in between is the conspiracy. After his glimpse through the portal, McGucket tried to forget what he had seen by inventing a device that could remove specific memories from his own brain. He called it the memory gun. It worked. It worked too well. Every time he used it, he lost more than he meant to. Names of people he loved, the taste of foods, pieces of his own personality. And then, because he could not stop himself, he started a society of like-minded people in the town who also wanted to forget. The Society of the Blind Eye. They wore robes, they met in secret. They used the memory gun to erase from the minds of ordinary townspeople any encounter with the supernatural that the townspeople found too frightening to live with. That is what explains the strange ambient amnesia of Gravity Falls as a place. Why does nobody in town seem to notice that the post office is haunted, that the lake has a monster, that fairies live in the rose bushes? They notice. They are made to forget. There is an entire subterranean infrastructure underneath the town, devoted to keeping the town shallow. McGucket built that. McGucket also built the giant robot version of himself that terrorized the town earlier in the show, the Gobblewonker, which is its own small piece of misdirection, because it implies that everything you think is a real monster in Gravity Falls might actually be the half-remembered work of one heartbroken engineer trying to be useful. It is a stunning piece of writing. The town crank turns out to be the most important supporting character. The lunatic was a lunatic because he chose to forget the most painful thing in his life, and the choice ate him alive. The show argues, very softly, that knowing is better than forgetting. McGucket's arc, when it lands, is one of the most quietly devastating in the entire run, because he eventually gets to choose to take his memories back, and he does, and his eyes change. The portal itself deserves a chapter of its own, because for 30 years inside the story, and for almost 20 episodes inside the show, it just sits there in the basement, a half-remembered set piece, a backdrop for the family dinners that Stan eats alone in the room above. Then the show pulls it out from under you in the second season and reveals that the entire run, up to that moment, has been a heist movie pretending to be a children's cartoon. Stan has been collecting parts in secret, hiding fuel rods in the false back of a vending machine, buying barrels of plutonium-grade material on the black market and rolling them into the basement past tourists, tinkering at 3 in the morning when nobody is in the house. The show sets this up so quietly you forgive yourself for not noticing. There is a moment near the end of the first season where Stan slips away from a family dinner, goes down into the basement, opens the journal, and you see the journal has a 6-fingered hand on the cover and a 3 on it, and you spend the entire summer hiatus realizing that he must have all 3. That single shot, played without dialogue, is the show flipping its own table. Stan has all 3 journals, which means he has been waiting for this. When the portal finally lands, it lands as the story of a man who promised himself 30 years ago that he would not stop and has not. He brings the machine back online. The countdown starts. The portal hums and shakes the woods. Dipper and Mabel try to stop him, because to a child the obvious read is that the man at the controls is the villain. He is not. He is the brother who never quit. And when the doors open and a figure walks out, 6-fingered, weather-beaten, alive, the show resets itself for a second time. Stanford is back. The man you thought you knew is not Stanford. The man you did not know you needed is Stanford. Every story after this one is now playing on a different board. While that bigger machine was running in the basement, the show was also slowly drawing out a smaller conspiracy on the surface, the one that runs the town. Gravity Falls is, on its surface, a sleepy Oregon logging town with a mayor in the middle of the square and a diner where the waitress knows your order. Underneath it is run, as small towns very often are run, by a single family with too much money and too much time. The Northwests live in a mansion at the top of a hill, set apart from the town like a kind of castle, and they tell themselves and the town a beautiful lie. The lie is that Nathaniel Northwest was the founder of Gravity Falls, the noble pioneer who pressed into the wilderness and established the town. There is a statue, There are stained glass windows. There is a portrait gallery. There is a family motto. It is all fake. The episode Northwest Mansion Mystery is the show pulling that lie apart on screen. The Northwests are not descended from the founder of Gravity Falls. The town's actual founder, who we will get to in a moment, is somebody else entirely, and the Northwests bought the right to claim that legacy by paying off historians and rewriting plaques. That is the surface. Underneath the surface is something colder. The Northwests promised the lumberjacks who built their mansion that they would be invited back to the annual party in perpetuity, in exchange for their labor, and then they broke that promise as soon as the mansion was finished, and the head lumberjack died on the doorstep, and his ghost has been haunting the family for 150 years on a curse that activates at the exact moment of his death. The show plays it as a gothic horror episode. It is also a labor parable. The rich family in town built their fortune on a betrayal of the workers who literally raised their walls, and the ghost of that betrayal has been waiting in their attic ever since. The town's most respectable family is its most haunted. The wealth is built on a debt that nobody has been allowed to talk about, and the youngest Northwest, Pacifica, eventually breaks the curse by doing what her ancestors never did, which is to open the door and let the workers in. It is a small but precise piece of writing, and it is one of the only times the show lets itself touch on real-world class explicitly, and it does it without breaking voice. Behind the Northwest lie sits the figure of Quentin Tremblay, the actual founder of Gravity Falls, and a man whose entire biography is its own beautiful little story. The show introduces him in a first-season episode that begins as a school field trip and turns into something genuinely strange. Quentin Tremblay, according to the historical record that Dipper and Seuss uncover in a hidden chamber under the museum, was the 8th president of the United States, a man so wildly incompetent that he was struck from the official record entirely. He pardoned babies. He delivered the State of the Union to a tomato. He was, in the kindest possible reading, completely out of his mind. He was also the real founder of Gravity Falls, having ridden west on horseback after his administration collapsed and stumbled into a valley that he named after the local effect of gravity behaving slightly oddly. He left behind a map, a tomb, and an embarrassment so thorough that the federal government in his own time agreed to erase him from history. The trick of it is that it is both a joke and not a joke. It is a joke because Tremblay is a cartoonish lunatic who preserved himself in peanut brittle. It is not a joke because the show is making a very precise point about how official histories actually work. The historical record of a country is a thing curated by the people in charge. Embarrassments get scrubbed. Inconvenient people get crossed out. The official version of who founded what is almost always, in some small way, a lie. Gravity Falls, the town, is just a more honest version of that pattern, where the actual founder was a pardon-happy madman who married a woodpecker, and the family currently sitting on his throne paid to be written into his place. That episode also gives us the document that erased Tremblay, a sheet of paper so old its existence implies an entire shadow continuity of presidents and pretenders that the show, with admirable restraint, never goes back to. It is the kind of detail that feels designed for a different show, and the fact that Gravity Falls drops it in the middle of season 1 and walks past it without comment is one of the quietest jokes the show ever makes. There is also a much more immediate official presence in town, in the form of 2 federal agents whose names alone tell you what the show thinks of them. Agent Powers and Agent Trigger, men in dark suits and dark sunglasses, arrive in Gravity Falls in the second half of the second season because the federal government has, finally, noticed that something is wrong. They notice the radiation. They notice the missing person reports. They notice the strange waveforms coming out of a tourist trap in the woods, and they begin to build a case against Stan, against the shack, against everything. The agents are a small piece of thematic counterweight. They are the show's version of the world we live in, the world of authorities who think they can fix anything by writing a report. They are wrong about almost everything. They are correct that something strange is happening at the Mystery Shack, but their version of strange is small. They are not equipped for what is actually under that floor. The show plays them as bumbling and overconfident, but it also lets them be a quiet threat, because Stan has been hiding from people like them for half his life, and he has every reason to be afraid. When the apocalypse comes, when Bill arrives and the sky turns the color of bruised fruit, the 2 agents are some of the first to be picked up and turned to stone. The show is not cruel about it. It is simply pointing out that no government has a department for what is about to happen. There is a long American tradition of this kind of story. the small town where the federal authorities discover something they cannot handle, and Gravity Falls is fluent in it. The men with the badges and the helicopters and the radio frequencies are, in the actual order of the universe, less powerful than a janitor with a baseball bat and a heart full of love for his great niece and nephew. Before the agents arrive, before the portal is rebuilt, before any of the cosmic stakes, the show's first real recurring villain is a child in a powder blue suit named Gideon Gleeful. He runs a tent of telepathy on the outskirts of town. He has a head of white blonde hair so improbable it looks like it has been sculpted. He hosts revivals where he reads minds and tells fortunes and works the crowd like a televangelist twice his age. He is, the show makes very clear, an extremely dangerous 9-year-old. The supernatural in Gravity Falls is, in his case, for sale. He wears a teardrop-shaped amulet around his neck, and that amulet, the show eventually reveals, gives him real psychic and telekinetic abilities. The amulet was given to him by his father in a cardboard box from a magic shop, but the amulet itself is older than anybody around it understands. With origins the show leaves deliberately murky. Gideon uses it to terrorize people he does not like, including the twins, including Stan, and to amass a small empire of merchandise and loyal followers in town. The show treats him as a kind of pint-sized stand-in for a particular kind of grifting American showbiz, the child preacher with a tooth too white and a hand too quick. Underneath that, though, sits the real game. Gideon wants the Mystery Shack. He wants the land. He has known about the journals for a long time, much longer than Dipper has. He has been hunting them. And when he finally gets his hands on the second journal, the one Dipper has been carrying, the show pivots into its first season finale and lets you understand that this small boy with the white blonde hair has been a major player in the larger Bill Cipher plot the entire time, without realizing it. Gideon is, on his level, doing the same thing Stanford did. He is contacting the same entity. He is making the same kind of deal. He is being told that he is special. He is being told that he is the only one who can unlock the portal. He is being used. The show has the grace to play that out by having him eventually defeated, his amulet broken, his empire dismantled, and to leave him for the end as one more person doing his small part in cleaning up. That is the cleanest arc the show gives a real antagonist, and it carries its own quiet warning, which is that everybody who deals with Bill, no matter what shape they wear or what age they are, gets used and gets discarded. There is no relationship with him that does not end with the smaller party in pieces on the floor. The other recurring threat that the show plays as comic but reveals as serious is time. Gravity Falls has time travel, in a register that is more like a procedural office department than a cosmic mystery. There is, the show tells you, a time anomaly removal crew, and the man we meet is Blandon Blandon, a janitorial figure in a chameleon suit and a headset who is dispatched from a far future timeline to clean up anomalies the way you might dispatch a maintenance technician to a broken vending machine. Blandon's first appearance is comic. He is unspooled by Dipper and Mabel by accident, and they steal his time machine and use it for a parade of small disasters that the show plays as pure summer fun. Underneath it, the show is building the idea that Gravity Falls' storyline is being watched from outside time. The agency Blandon works for is a real agency, with a real hierarchy, headed by a being known as the Time Baby. The Time Baby is exactly what its name promises. It is an enormous, irritable, infantile-sized cosmic being with the powers of a god and the mood swings of a toddler. It rules the future, it enforces continuity, and it is, until the apocalypse, the only entity in the show's stack of powers that Bill Cipher openly fears. There is, hidden behind everything, an order to the universe of Gravity Falls, and that order has a face. The show is content to play that face for laughs, but the moment Bill Cipher destroys the Time Baby in the final season, in a single offhand blast, you realize the show has been quietly preparing you for the worst possible truth, which is that the cosmic order has a sheriff, and the sheriff has been killed. There is a small recurring subplot through the show in which Blandon Blandon holds an ever-growing grudge against the twins, which culminates in a tournament called Globnar, in which the twins fight him in gladiatorial combat outside of time. Globnar itself is the show's most explicit science fiction set piece, and it ends with the twins winning and being granted, as a reward, the power to do anything with time they want. They choose, with great deliberation, not to use it on themselves. They choose, instead, the small kindness of going back to be present at Seuss's 10th birthday party, the one his father had failed to show up for. The moment is one of the show's quiet thematic pinions. Even when you have the power to rewrite the past will sometimes refuse to be rewritten, and the only thing you can choose is who shows up in it. At the bottom of the time travel material, the show is gently arguing for letting things be. The Time Baby protects continuity. Blendon enforces it. Bill, when he kills them both, is making a single statement that all rules will be broken now. And the twins are the only people who learn the lesson the time travel was teaching, which is that you do not save anything by trying to redo the parts that hurt. There is another piece of mythology that runs underneath all of this, and that piece is the wheel. There is a wheel that appears in the journals, that appears on the wall of an underground bunker, that appears in flashes throughout the show, and that wheel has 10 symbols arranged around the figure of a triangle with one eye. Each symbol is a person or an object. There is a pine tree, which is Dipper's hat. There is a shooting star, which is Mabel's sweater. There is a question mark, which is Seuss's shirt. There is an ice bag, which is Wendy's hat. There is a six-fingered hand, which is Stanford. There is a crescent moon, which is Stan, taken from the shape on his fez. There is a llama, which is Pacifica. There is a pentagram with an eye, which is Gideon. There is a glasses lens, which is McGucket. And there is a stitched heart, which is Robbie. Together they form a circle. In the center of the circle is Bill. The wheel is, according to the journals, the only way to defeat Bill Cipher in this dimension. If the 10 people represented by these 10 symbols stand in a circle and hold hands, in the order written, on the day, with the will, they form a kind of cosmic cage that can banish Bill from the third dimension permanently. The show takes the wheel seriously enough that an entire episode is devoted to Ford trying to teach Stan the value of it, and seriously enough that, in the apocalypse, Ford and the rest do gather to attempt the ritual. They almost pull it off. The reason it does not work, the show argues, is that the wheel cannot work without all 10 of its members in agreement, and the wheel requires Stan and Ford to hold hands, which is, given everything we have just learned about the brothers, a quiet way of telling you that the universe will only be saved by a reconciliation that the people involved are not ready to perform. It is a beautifully cruel piece of plot mechanics. The show gives you the literal key to the door and then makes the key itself the thing the characters cannot turn. At the heart of the wheel is a metaphor. The show is telling you that no cosmic puzzle ever has a purely cosmic answer. The answer to the apocalypse is two old men finally admitting they love each other. The answer is always domestic. That reconciliation does not come easily. It is preceded by one of the most cleanly written villain arcs in the show, and the arc belongs to Bill himself, in the body of Dipper. The episode the show calls Sock Opera is where Bill stops being a guest in this story and becomes the engine of it. Dipper, exhausted, desperate, trying to unlock a laptop that he believes will give him the answer to who the author is, accepts an offer from Bill that any reasonable person would refuse. He lets Bill into his body, just for a moment, just to type, just to crack the password. And from inside Dipper's body, Bill does what Bill always does. He breaks the deal. He throws Dipper's body around. He smashes fingers. He laughs while doing it. Sock opera is not really about a plot mechanism. It is the show admitting that the threat we have been smiling at for 2 seasons is now physical, that it has hands, that those hands can use a child's body to hurt that child. Dipper is rescued, eventually, by Mabel, who gives up something she has been chasing for the whole episode, a chance with a boy she likes, in order to get her brother back. It is a small sacrifice. It is the show's quiet model for every larger sacrifice that follows. Bill is repelled. Dipper is restored. The bond between the twins is briefly stretched and immediately repaired, and the show makes a note in its own ledger that, from now on, the safe distance between Bill Cipher and the people we love is gone. He is in our houses now. He is in our heads. Sock opera is, structurally, the moment Bill becomes the real villain of the show, and the show does it not with a battle, but with a single moment of bargaining at a kitchen table. That bargaining table is also where the show plays out its next mystery, which is the question of who the author of the journals actually was. The show keeps that question alive for an entire season and a half. The third journal contains, throughout it, references to a person Stanford was once close to, and the second journal hints at a colleague who might be the author himself. The episode The Society of the Blind Eye, when it lands, gives us a name for the man behind those references, which is Fiddleford McGucket, and for a long stretch fans believed the author and McGucket were the same person, that the man wandering the woods in his nightgown was the genius who had written the books. The show plays with that idea, lets it breathe, and then quietly tells you it is wrong. The author is somebody else. The author is the man Stan has been trying to bring back from the portal for 30 years. The author's identity is the show's longest single mystery, and it pays off in the second season with the return of Stanley Pines, the original Stanford, the six-fingered man whose presence has been felt in every page of every journal since the very first episode of the show. And when he walks out of the portal, weather-beaten, hardened, his voice slightly different from his brother's because his life has been different from his brother's, the show does not give him a hero's welcome. It gives him a slap. The brothers, after 30 years apart, do not embrace. They punch each other, they argue, they cannot share a meal without the air getting cold. The show is quietly refusing to give you the easy reunion, because reunions, in the world this show is building, do not come from absence ending, they come from work. From sitting in the same room and saying the thing you have been afraid to say. From years, sometimes, of small kindnesses that finally add up. The author was never the point. The journals were always pointing at a family, not at a manuscript. While the brothers were not speaking, the show was building one of its most beautifully designed episodes, in which Bill, repelled but not destroyed, begins to act on a much longer plan. The episode The Last Mabelcorn is the show's longest single look at how Bill operates. We see, for the first time, the full scope of his influence. We see him cycle through possessing one mind, then another, while Ford sits in a tinfoil hat and tries to keep him out. We see Mabel, trying to bargain with unicorns for the materials of a more permanent ward, and discovering that the unicorns are con artists too, that the moral certainty they project is a lie, that nothing in Gravity Falls is allowed to be simple. The point is small but precise. Even the things in this show that look pure are running a hustle. Even the unicorns are grifters. The world is one long ladder of grifts, all the way down to a triangle in a top hat in a dream. The episode also gives us, in flashback, the moment Ford realized what Bill actually was. It shows us Ford and Bill in what looks like a partnership of equals, and then it shows us Bill, in private, laughing about it, in front of a screen that contains the entire history of the universe. Bill knew, from the moment he chose Ford, what he was going to do. There was no relationship, there was only the long con. And Ford realizing it, alone, at 3 in the morning, is the show's image of what it costs to wake up. By this point in the show, the apocalypse is no longer a question of if, it is a question of when. And the when arrives in an episode whose title alone tells you the show is no longer pretending. Weirdmageddon, the rift between dimensions, the one Stanford and McGucket created and tried to bury, has been kept stable by Ford, but a single moment of misdirection, a small piece of social engineering by Bill, through a vessel none of the characters were expecting, allows the rift to open. The sky cracks, the geometry of Gravity Falls breaks. Bill steps physically into our dimension for the first time, and what comes through with him is not a single being, but an entire menagerie of his friends, the henchmaniacs. A cast of creatures so visually deranged they look like the inside of a fever. There is 8-Ball, a creature whose head is an 8-ball. There is Kryptos, the rhombus. There is Pyronica, a flaming pink woman with one eye. There is Teeth, which is exactly what it sounds like. The henchmaniacs are, in the show's own logic, the friend group Bill has been hanging around with during the 30 years Ford was on the run. They are the company he keeps. They are also, in a small and precise way, the show showing you who you become when you choose to make a deal with somebody like Bill. You become the people he hangs out with. You become a piece of furniture in his room. On the level of plot, this has been the plan all along. Bill came to this dimension, through Ford, on a 30-year construction project that ended in the rift in the sky. On the level of feeling, the show has been writing this scene the whole time. Every episode in the first season was already aiming at the apocalypse. The gentle small-town summer was always sliding toward a sky full of teeth. Once Weirdmageddon begins, the conspiracies in the show stop being hidden and start being told to you with the lights on. You can see what Bill wants now. He wants a permanent stage. He wants this dimension to become the kind of nightmare he can headline. He has the henchmaniacs running riot. He has a throne in the middle of Gravity Falls, built from the petrified bodies of townspeople he has caught and frozen mid-scream. He has Ford trapped in a kind of cage near his seat, refusing to give him the equation Bill needs to make Weirdmageddon escape the boundary of the town and spread out into the rest of the world. That last detail, the boundary, is one of the strangest pieces of cosmology the show offers, and it is one of the quietest puzzles in the whole run. There is a force around Gravity Falls, present from the founding, that contains supernatural weirdness inside the boundaries of the town. It is the reason creatures and oddities accumulate here. It is why the journals exist. It is also why the apocalypse cannot escape the valley unless Bill cracks the boundary. The show implies, without ever saying so directly, that this is one of those rare aspects of the world where there is actually a benevolent layer, that something or somebody, long ago, drew a circle around this place to protect the rest of the world from what might come through. We never find out who, we never find out why. That is the show being honest. There are some mysteries the show refuses to solve for you, because the not knowing is part of the texture of the place. Bill spends most of the apocalypse trying to find the boundary's weak point. Ford spends most of the apocalypse refusing to tell him. For once, Gravity Falls is fighting on the side of the good guys. The strange ambient weirdness of the place is, in this single matter, holding the line. Inside the apocalypse, the show gives Mabel her own private corner, and this is some of the saddest writing in the run. Mabel has spent the entire summer terrified, on some level, of growing up. She has watched Dipper edge closer to wanting to stay in Gravity Falls. She has watched her relationships shift. She has been promised, in the form of a falsified offer of an internship at the shack, that she and her brother can stay together forever. And when she discovers the offer was fake, and that the summer is in fact ending, she runs into the woods, broken-hearted, and she is caught. She is caught by Bill, who places her inside a giant pink prison bubble made of bedazzled glass and laughter. The bubble is called Mabeland. Inside the bubble, the world is everything Mabel ever wanted. It is summer, forever. Her friends are there. Her favorite foods are there. Boys are there. Nothing is hard. Nothing ends. And when Dipper and the rest finally fight their way to the bubble and break in to rescue her, what they find is a Mabel who genuinely does not want to leave. The bubble is the show's clearest single statement about itself. The most dangerous prison in the show is not the gold cage Ford hangs in. It is the prison of getting exactly what you want, forever, with no growing up attached. Bill knows what Mabel wants better than her own brother does, because Bill is, in his own way, the show's metaphor for the part of your own mind that will lie to you when you are afraid. The bubble is the offer the entire show has been making the viewer, very quietly, since the first episode. It is the offer of a summer that never ends, and it is, very lovingly, the offer the show eventually refuses to honor. Mabel chooses, by the end of the episode, to leave Mabeland. She chooses growing up. She chooses the harder, smaller, real summer outside the bubble. The show is, in its own quiet way, telling its own audience the same thing. You cannot live here forever. You are not supposed to. The summer has to end. Once Mabel is out of the bubble, the show pulls its cast back together and lets it move toward the center of the apocalypse, where Bill is waiting in his pyramid, and where the only way to defeat him, the show has been telling you for the entire run, is the wheel. And in the final episode, the show breaks its own promise. The wheel does not work. Or rather, it almost works, but Stan and Ford cannot hold hands long enough to make it close. They argue. The circle breaks. The whole plan collapses. That collapse is the show telling you that you cannot rely on the cosmic structure to save you. You have to do it some other way. So Stan does. The only person who can defeat Bill is the only person in the cast who has spent his whole life being a con artist. Stan offers Bill a deal. He will let Bill into his mind. Bill, who has been searching for Ford's mind to crack the equation, takes Stan instead, because Stan, in his brother's coat and his brother's haircut, looks like Ford, and Bill is, on some level, vain enough not to check. Stan lets Bill in. Bill enters Stan's mind, and the moment Bill is inside, Ford, on the outside, fires the memory gun at Stan. The memory gun erases the specific memories of Bill from Stan's brain. With Bill inside the brain, the gun erases Bill. The mystery that has run for 30 years, that has driven the entire show, ends in a single trick. The con artist outsmarts the dream creature, and the price is everything Stan ever knew. Every memory of his life, the kids, his brother, the mystery shack, the portal, the 30 years, all of it gone. And the show stages it, not as a triumph, but as a small, quiet kitchen scene afterwards, with Stan in a chair, a blanket on his shoulders, looking up at his brother like he is looking at a stranger. That is the moment we opened on. That is the moment under everything. The only weapon that worked on Bill was a man willing to give up his own life inside his own head. There is no clever cosmic ritual. There is only a brother saving a brother by becoming, briefly, nobody at all. There is a slow recovery after that. Mabel hangs up photographs around Stan's chair, day after day, and reads memories back to him from a scrapbook. And slowly, over the course of a montage that runs in the final episode, the man comes back. He sees the kids. He says their names. He says Ford's name. The show argues, quietly, that the universe is held together not by cosmic wheels but by the small, ongoing work of one 12-year-old girl with a glue gun. Stan's recovery is the same point as the one underneath the wheel, restated for a second time. The cosmos has no plan. The plan is people who love you, in the room with you, reminding you of who you are. Mabel does that work for her great-uncle, and the show frames it as the moment the magic was actually performed. The triangle was destroyed by a memory gun. The man it tried to destroy was rebuilt by a child's scrapbook. The show is doing its homework here. Every magical structure it has built has a domestic answer underneath. Every apocalypse has a kitchen. Every triangle has a niece. Before we leave the apocalypse, we have to talk about the axolotl, because the axolotl is the cleanest example in the show of a piece of mythology the writers wrote that the show itself did not have time to deliver. As Bill is being erased inside Stan's mind, he turns, in the show's final moments inside that mindscape, and speaks a string of strange syllables. The show does not subtitle them. They scroll past as nonsense. Fans, very quickly, ran them through a Caesar cipher and got an invocation that calls on a being called the axolotl, asking, in the moment of burning, to return. The axolotl is referenced only in supplementary material, in the Journal 3 book that came out after the series ended, and later in the Book of Bill, which means the show itself, on screen, never explained what or who the axolotl is. The supplementary material gives us a godlike figure, older than Bill, vast and lonely, that watches over multiverses, that exists outside of time, that once made a deal with Bill in which Bill might be allowed to return if certain cosmic conditions were met. None of that is on screen in the show itself. On screen, you just get the cipher, dropped into the final battle, and the implication that even the entity you are watching die has a contingency plan written in code. The axolotl is the show leaving an ending that left a door open. Bill, the show implies, might come back. He has bargained for it. He is on a list somewhere. The Book of Bill, published years after the show ended and treated by the writers as part of the broader canon, fills in much of that picture and lets Hirsch explicitly play with Bill's possible return. But inside the show itself, the axolotl is just a coded line in a dying man's mouth. That restraint is part of why the show feels the way it does. It is willing to put the most consequential piece of mythology of its own ending into a code that the average viewer will never decode. It is content to let some mysteries remain mysteries. Outside the show, the axolotl line was the seed of one of the strangest pieces of fan archaeology in modern television, which is the cipher hunt of the summer of 2016. The cipher hunt was not a hidden piece of the show. It was a real-world hunt assembled by the show's creator, Alex Hirsch, in the months after Gravity Falls ended, and it deserves its place in this list because it is the only piece of Gravity Falls mythology that ever literally walked off the screen and onto the planet. Hirsch posted, on social media, a single image. The image was a cipher. The cipher, when decoded, gave fans coordinates, and the coordinates led to a location in the real world. At that real-world location was another cipher, which led to another location, and so on, across multiple continents, for weeks, with fans physically traveling to remote spots in Russia and Japan and the United States in order to crack the next piece of the puzzle. The final destination was a forest in Oregon. In the forest, there was a real, life-sized statue of Bill Cipher. The same Bill Cipher who had been turned to stone at the end of the show was, in the real world, waiting in a forest, for the fans who finished the hunt to physically find him. Hirsch made a piece of his own fiction crawl off the page and live in the real geography of the world. The statue was carried out of the forest afterwards by fans, because Hirsch did not have permission to leave it there, and it is now in storage somewhere, occasionally photographed at conventions. There has rarely been a more literal version of a story leaving its own pages. The hunt was also a quiet declaration by Hirsch that the show's ciphers had always been more than decoration, that the layer of code under the surface of the show was something he expected people to take seriously, and that he was willing to spend his own money and his own time on a piece of postscript that lived only for the fans who would actually do the work. It is one of the more generous gestures any animation showrunner has made to an audience, and it is a piece of the show's broader life that the show was never confined to the screen. That layer of code under the show is its own deep design choice, and it is worth pausing on. Across the run of Gravity Falls, almost every episode credits sequence contains a cipher. The earliest episodes used a Caesar cipher with a shift of 3, which is the simplest cipher you can teach a child. As the show progressed and as fans began to crack the early codes within hours of episodes airing, the ciphers became harder. Atbash codes appeared, a 1Z26 substitution, Vigenère ciphers, which require a keyword to crack and which gave fans days of work per episode. The show eventually combined codes, layering one cipher inside another, so that you had to crack the outer to get the keyword to the inner. There were ciphers hidden in the credits, ciphers hidden in background graffiti, ciphers stamped on objects in the background of single shots, ciphers spoken in reversed audio under closing themes. The ciphers were, in many cases, genuine spoilers. Decoded passages from the credits revealed plot points an entire season before they aired. Hints at Stan's secret identity appeared, in cipher, well before the reveal. The names of future villains appeared in cipher long before the villains arrived. Hirsch was, in the most literal way, hiding the show's secrets in the show's own credits, and trusting that the small number of fans who would do the work to decode them would not spoil the show for everybody else. That trust was, mostly, kept. The fan community treated the decoded messages with a kind of reverence, posting them with warnings, hiding them behind spoiler tags, treating them as the private archive of the people who had earned them. It is a model of how a piece of pop fiction can be made into a participatory mystery, and it is, as far as I can tell, one of the only times this has been done at this scale on a children's network. Gravity Falls is one of the very few shows whose deepest puzzles were built into the structural fabric of the broadcast itself. There are also ciphers buried elsewhere, in the spaces between episodes, in shorts, in promotional material, in pieces of merchandise. The Journal 3 replica that was published as a tie-in book after the series ended contains, in the form of ultraviolet ink and hidden flaps and torn pages, more code than any single episode of the show, and in that book some of the show's loose threads finally close. The book confirms in writing many of the things the show only suggested. It confirms that Bill is from the second dimension. It confirms that the rift formed because of the Stanford and Bill collaboration. It confirms the layout of Bill's mind. It also leaves space, deliberately, for the open question of the Axolotl, which we already discussed, by giving us additional pieces of the Bill backstory, without fully closing the door on Bill's return. The book is, in itself, a deliberate piece of design. It is the show's writers passing you a sealed envelope after the show is over, and inside the envelope are answers, but only the answers they wanted you to have. The rest is still in code. The Book of Bill, which came out a few years later and is sometimes treated as a kind of villain memoir, plays the same game from the other side. It is written in Bill's voice. It lies to you. It contradicts itself. It includes information that fans have spent years arguing about, because the book itself cannot be trusted as a source. The show's writers, after the show ended, kept playing the same game they had been playing while the show was on the air, hiding answers inside unreliable narrators, inside puzzles, inside merchandise. That is a kind of dedication to a piece of fiction that is genuinely rare. There is a smaller piece of the show's mythology that we should not skip past, because the show itself does not skip past it, and that is the question of who Seuss is. Seuss is the handyman at the Mystery Shack, a soft-hearted man in a question-mark shirt who fixes broken things and treats the twins as if they were his own family. The show plays him as comic relief for most of its run, and you do not realize, until very late, that he is one of the saddest characters in the cast. Seuss's father left when he was a child. His mother is in the picture only at a distance. He is being raised, in effect, by his grandmother, an older woman who runs a small restaurant and who treats him with the kind of unconditional love that the show clearly thinks every child deserves and that no child can really repay. Seuss is at the Mystery Shack because the Mystery Shack is, for him, the closest thing to a stable family he has ever had. Stan is, to Seuss, in many quiet ways, the father he never had. There is an episode in which the time machine is used to visit a moment from Seuss's childhood, an attempt to fix the absence of a father at his birthday party, and the show resolves it not by changing the past, but by changing who shows up for him in the past. The episode is one of the only times in the show in which a character takes a literal opportunity to fix the past, and the answer is not to remake the person who failed, but to choose to be the one who shows up instead. Some people will not change, even if you hand them the universe, and the only thing you can do is choose, as Seuss chooses, to be a better adult to the next generation than your own parent was to you. By the end of the show, Stan retires from the Mystery Shack, and the Mystery Shack is handed down, almost ceremonially, to Seuss, who runs it from then on. The show's surrogate fathers are real. They are not lesser. The man who shows up is the father, regardless of who shares your blood. The show makes that argument in the gentlest possible terms, and it is one of the things people remember most about the run. Wendy, the red-headed teenage cashier at the Mystery Shack, gets a similar small thread of her own. Her family, the Corduroys, are a clan of lumberjacks, all enormous and bearded and emotionally repressed. Her father, Manly Dan, is the loudest, largest, angriest of them all. Wendy spends the show carrying herself with a kind of cool, distant calm that we eventually realize is, in part, a survival mechanism. Because in a household of muscle-bound rage, you survive by being the quiet one. The Corduroy family thread is smaller than the others on this list, but it is real, and the show pays it off in scattered moments across the run, especially in scenes where Wendy and her father step out of their usual roles long enough to actually see each other. The show is, very quietly, suggesting that even the largest, loudest man in town might be acting tough because something happened to him a long time ago that he never processed, and that the daughter holding herself at a careful distance is doing the same thing in reverse. The show does not over-explain it. It just shows you the pattern, lets you see it, and moves on. The Corduroys are not the only family in town quietly grieving in their own ways. The Northwests, the Pines, the Gleefuls, the Ramirezes, the McGuckets, they are all, in their own ways, the same story told in different keys. Every family in Gravity Falls is, somehow, missing somebody. The show is, in its bones, a show about absence. The woods around the town are full of their own smaller stories, each one a piece of the broader pattern, and a sleep essay is a generous enough form to walk through them slowly. The gnomes, who arrive in the very first episode of the show, are a small society of bearded creatures that operate, in the language of the show, almost like a bachelor cult. They have a king. They have a kingdom in a tree. They have, in their very first appearance, a plan to forcibly marry Mabel, a plan she escapes from by understanding, before the gnomes do, that they are not as powerful as their stack of bodies suggests. The gnomes are physically a tower of small bodies pretending to be one large body. That is one of the most efficient pieces of visual writing in the entire first episode of the show. The gnomes are the show's introduction, in cartoon form, to the kind of group that mistakes its own size for its own competence. Every other group in the show is also some version of that. The Society of the Blind Eye is gnomes in robes. The Henchmaniacs are gnomes in flames. The Northwest Extended Family at their annual ball is gnomes in tuxedos. The show puts the gnomes in episode 1 because they are the prototype. Every villain afterwards is a more elaborate dress-up of the same shape. The Manitars, the bull-headed muscle-bound warriors who live in a cave in the hills, are the show's second small society, and they are a fairly clean parable about a particular kind of masculinity that the show has, in the most polite possible way, decided is funny. Dipper, anxious to prove himself, spends a whole episode trying to become a Manitar, undergoing trials, drinking from a goblet, being given a vest. The reveal of the episode is that the Manitars, the most aggressively masculine creatures in town, are themselves terrified, in private, of a single creature called the multi-bear, who lives at the top of a mountain and who is reputed to be the strongest beast in the forest. The episode sets up a final fight in which Dipper is meant to kill the multi-bear in order to graduate into manhood. He refuses. He spares the multi-bear, who turns out to be a kind, gentle creature who listens to old disco pop in his cave and means no harm. The show is, very gently, making a single argument about masculinity. The Manitars are doing every possible performance of strength, and they are still wrong about the most important thing in the woods. The multi-bear is, in the show's terms, the actual man, quiet, kind, listening to music. The Manitars and the multi-bear are the same point as the one underneath the Corduroys and Seuss, restated in cartoon shorthand. The loud are wrong about strength, the quiet are correct. There is a shapeshifter trapped in a cryogenic capsule in Stanford's underground bunker, and that shapeshifter is its own small piece of writing. The creature can take any form. It was caught and contained by Stanford during his decades of research before he disappeared. It is one of the few creatures Stanford was actually frightened of, because, in the show's logic, a creature that can become anything is a creature that can become you. The episode in which Dipper and Seuss accidentally release the shapeshifter is the show's first real horror sequence, drawn and scored with the same care as the apocalypse will be drawn later. And the shapeshifter's final form, frozen back into the capsule, is Dipper himself, mid-scream. The show is willing, here, to flirt with the kind of fear that is normally kept off of children's networks. There is a small, perfectly buried piece of writing in that episode, where Stanford, on a hidden tape recorder we listen to in passing, talks about how, in his most frightened moments, he is not sure whether his closest friend in town is still a man or has been replaced. That tape is a single line. It is gone in a moment. It is also one of the most paranoid pieces of dialogue in the show, and it tells you, in passing, that for 30 years before the show begins, Stanford was already living in a world where he could not trust the people around him to be themselves. The shapeshifter is not really a monster. It is a metaphor for what happens to a brain that has spent too long with Bill Cipher whispering at the edges of it. There are fairies in Gravity Falls who steal teeth and whose society we barely see. There are gremloblins who you can only look at through a hand mirror. There are creatures called gremlins in the language of the journals that no episode ever fully addresses. There is a creature called the Hide Behind, which is, by the show's own description, a creature you can only see in the corner of your eye, and which dissipates the moment you turn your head. The Hide Behind is one of the cleanest small jokes in the show's writing, because every shot it appears in shows you only the suggestion of a tail or an outline at the edge of the frame. The show is teasing you with its own off-screen space. It is reminding you that, even in a cartoon, there is always a part of the frame you are not looking at, and that something might live there. That is, in miniature, the show's broader thesis. Almost every secret in Gravity Falls is something that has been in the frame the whole time and that you, the viewer, have not been looking at. The Hide Behind is the show winking at the principal from inside the show itself. Far underneath the town, an entire infrastructure exists that the show only hints at. The bunker that hides the shapeshifter is the size of a small office park. The portal room is the size of a cathedral. There are tunnels under the Mystery Shack that lead places the show never has time to show you. The journals reference labs and storage rooms and observation chambers that we get into for a few seconds and never again. The show could not have shown you all of it even if it had wanted to. There is more, beneath the surface, than even Stanford was able to chart in his 30 years of work. The town is sitting on a kind of cosmic geology that the show is content to leave half-mapped. That is, in itself, a piece of the show's design philosophy. A mystery box show that closed all its boxes would not be a mystery box show. Gravity Falls is willing to leave doors locked. There is at least one episode in which Dipper, exploring the second journal, finds a page that references a creature the show simply never gets around to dramatizing. It is in there. Stanford encountered it. We never see it. The show is acting, for 2 seasons, like a real travelogue written by a real man, which means there are corners of the journey it did not have time to write up. While we are in the underground, we should sit with the question of Ford's 30 years on the other side of the portal, because the show is, on this point, oddly restrained. We know Stanford was pulled into the portal by Bill, or pushed in by Stanley, depending on how you read the fight, and we know he spent 30 years moving through other dimensions before the second portal sequence finally pulled him home. The show only ever shows us very brief glimpses of where he was. We get hints in dialogue. We get a flash here and there. We get the slight crustiness of the man who walks out, his sidearm on his hip, his coat too thick, his eyes wary. The show, by design, will not tell us the whole story. The supplementary materials fill in some of it. The Journal 3 book has pages from Stanford's journals during those years. The Book of Bill, written from the other side, fills in still more. But on the show itself, on Disney XD, in front of a children's audience, the show argued, by omission, that the 30 years should remain mostly off-screen. It is the rare case of a piece of fiction trusting the off-screen space to do its work. The Ford who comes back to Gravity Falls is a man who has, in the show's own internal logic, lived through more than the show is willing to dramatize. You see it on his face. You see it in the way he holds the journal. The show wanted those 30 years to feel exactly as long as a real 30 years would feel, which is to say, unspeakable. There is a piece of the show that runs underneath every episode and that very few people talk about, and that is the opening title sequence. The opening of Gravity Falls is, on its surface, a brief montage of the cast and the woods and the shack, set to a piece of music that has become, for a particular generation of viewers, a kind of involuntary nostalgia trigger. The opening, on careful watching, changes, not visibly, not loudly, but across the run of the show. On certain episodes, single frames of the opening are replaced with hidden material. There are frames of Bill in the opening before Bill has been introduced. There are frames of the wheel in the opening before the wheel has been explained. There are flashes of imagery that fans, frame stepping through the opening over the years, have cataloged as a kind of subliminal index of where the show is going. The opening itself is signed, in cipher, in the reversed audio at the very end. There is, at the close of the theme tune, a brief whisper, and that whisper, when reversed, is a short message. The earliest reversed whisper was a short hint pointing back at the show's first cipher. Later in the show, the whispered audio became fuller and more revealing. The show was hiding spoilers and hints in a place no parent would ever think to scrub, which is the bit you skip past every week. Hirsch knew exactly which 30-something seconds of the episode the audience treated as the safest space to leave the room to refill a glass of water, and he made that the place to hide some of the show's deepest secrets. That is, on its own, a small piece of brilliance, and it is the kind of work that has made Gravity Falls into the show fans still write about a decade after it ended. The show has a creator, and the creator is part of the show's quiet weave too. Alex Hirsch is the show's writer, voice of Stan and Seuss and Bill, and the person whose life is, on some level, the show. He has a twin sister named Ariel, and the show has stated, repeatedly and openly, that the bond between Dipper and Mabel is modeled on the bond between Alex and Ariel. That is not a hidden secret. It is just a piece of authorship that, once you know it, makes the show feel different. Mabel was a real person before she was a character. Dipper was a real person before he was a character. The summer they have together is a kind of fictionalized version of summers Hirsch actually remembers. The show was written in part as a love letter from one twin to another. That fact does not appear in the dialogue. It is not announced. It exists only as a background structural fact that informs every line of writing about the twins. The show is, on some level, a true story dressed up as a fantasy. The fantasy is the wallpaper. The relationship between the twins is the wall. The show is not afraid to let you see, in the last season, how much the loss of that summer hurts. Because Hirsch has, at this point, already lived through that loss in his own way. You cannot stay a child twin. You cannot stay anyone's twin in the same shape forever. People move out. People marry. People take jobs in different cities. The show is willing, by the final episodes, to put that on screen with very little pretense, and it is one of the only animated shows aimed at a children's audience that has been willing to look that particular fact in the face. The writer was writing for himself about the most important relationship of his own life, and the show carries the weight of that the whole way through. Hirsch is also a voice actor of unusual reach inside his own show. He voices Stan. He voices Seuss. He voices Bill. He voices most of the henchmaniacs. He voices, at various points, the Gobblewonker and the Multibear and almost every monster in the woods. The same throat that says, "I see you, Pine Tree," in the voice of Bill says, "Good morning, sweetie," in the voice of Seuss. And what about the kids, in the voice of Stan? The man is, on some level, performing the entire ecosystem of the show. He is the kid father figure. He is the gentle older brother. He is the villain. He is the monsters. He is the conspiracy and the kindness in the same throat. That is a structural argument, woven into the credits, that the conspiracies in Gravity Falls are not external. They come from the same place the kindness comes from. The same mouth that gives you Bill gives you Stan. The show is making a strong, quiet, repeated argument that the supernatural in this town is, in some sense, our own throat. That is a thesis that is not directly stated and that I cannot prove from any single interview, but the casting choices alone make it a hard reading to dismiss. There is also a more practical, less mystical layer to the show, which is the production conspiracy. Gravity Falls was made on a tight schedule for Disney Channel, and later Disney XD, between the years 2012 and 2016. It ran for 2 seasons and 40 episodes plus shorts. Hirsch has spoken in interviews about the limits the network placed on him, about what he could and could not show, about the standards and practices department that flagged scenes for content. He has spoken about a particular line that the standards team almost cut and that he fought to keep. He has spoken about endings he could not write. The show is shaped, like every show, by the company that pays for it. And some pieces of the show that fans assume are buried lore are, in reality, traces of the network telling the writer no. There is, the show implies, in an episode in which Dipper sits in front of a stack of evidence boards trying to work out who the author is. A kind of meta-joke about being a writer in a corporate writer's room, looking at a wall of half-completed material that you do not have the budget to finish. The show is, in places, an honest portrait of the conditions under which it was made. The two-season cap was, in part, Hirsch's own decision. He wanted to give the show an ending. He wanted to refuse the slow stretch of seasons that television tends to drift into. He ended it, exactly when he wanted, on terms that he negotiated. That is not exactly a hidden mystery. It is, in a sense, the opposite of one. It is the act of a writer choosing the size of his own story. There is also a smaller piece of context worth mentioning, which is the question of what was cut. Disney has, throughout the show's run, made small edits, removed lines, requested certain images be reframed, and in at least one widely reported case, edited a scene of an episode after broadcast in international versions because of a piece of background iconography the network had become uncomfortable with. By most accounts, the edit was made to a brief background gag rather than to the main action. The version of Gravity Falls that you watched, depending on where in the world you were, may not have been the exact version that aired in the United States. The differences are minor. The fact that they exist at all is a small portrait of how international television distribution actually works. Hirsch has, in interviews, spoken openly about the edits, in a register of neither anger nor surprise. They are simply, in his own framing, part of the cost of working inside a large studio. The fact that the show survived as well as it did, given how often standards departments push back against animated mystery, is a small piece of its own story. Gravity Falls, in the end, got to be the show it wanted to be. There are a handful of episodes that exist almost entirely as exercises in their own thematic mood, and they are worth visiting one by one, because they are the show's most concentrated explorations of its own central themes. The episode in which Dipper and Mabel fall into a bottomless pit while telling each other stories is a sleeper, both because it is genuinely useful background for understanding the show, and because it is a small piece of stagecraft about how stories work. The Bottomless Pit episode is, structurally, a frame story in which the twins and Stan and Seuss take turns narrating short scenes from the past, and in which the pit itself, the actual bottomless pit, is treated as a fact of the town's geography that nobody bothers to explain. There is a literal bottomless pit on the outskirts of Gravity Falls. Nobody asks why, nobody asks where it goes. The show is willing to put a piece of cosmic infrastructure in front of you and refuse to investigate it. There is a hole in the floor of the world here, and the show is content to use it as a location for jokes. That, too, is a version of the show's broader thesis. The town is unstable in ways that the people who live in it have stopped noticing. They drink coffee on the edge of a bottomless pit and treat it as a slightly inconvenient walking route. The casualness is the point. A town that lives next door to the supernatural will, eventually, find ways to ignore it, the same way a small town near a fault line learns to read the local seismograph and shrug. Gravity Falls, as a town, has gotten very good at shrugging. The episode that introduces the probabilitator is a small piece of writing that does the same thing in the opposite direction. The probabilitator is a device that calculates the most likely outcome of any given decision, and the episode is structured around the idea that, given enough computation, you could reduce any human relationship to a percentage. Stan and Dipper end up using the probabilitator to play in a fantasy game tournament, and the device, as devices in the show often do, almost ruins them by being too efficient. The episode is the show's first real engagement with the idea that knowing the answer in advance kills the experience of finding it. The probabilitator is, on some level, a piece of fan theory itself, dramatized inside the show. The harder you crunch the numbers, the less of the show there is to enjoy. The show is, very gently, telling the audience that it is okay to leave some mysteries unsolved. There is also an episode called Seuss and the Real Girl, which addresses, in its own way, the show's ongoing thread about loneliness. Seuss, encouraged by Dipper and Mabel, downloads a dating simulator video game, and the game's lead character, a pixelated young woman named Giffany, becomes sentient and dangerous and possessive. The episode plays like a parody of obsessive online relationships, and underneath that parody it is the show treating Seuss's loneliness with a kind of horror movie respect. On the surface, it is the game itself, Machines that learn from you can learn to want you in ways you do not want to be wanted. Underneath that, Seuss has so few real connections in his life that even a video game character can briefly look like a relationship to him. The show does the same thing it always does. It plays the horror for laughs and then leaves a single quiet beat at the end, where you understand the scale of what was actually being looked at. By the end of the show, Seuss meets Melody, a real person, a genuinely kind woman who works at a vending machine company, and the show takes the time to give them a relationship that lasts past the finale. Seuss's arc, taken as a whole, is that the show is genuinely committed to the idea that nobody has to be alone forever, even the people who, on paper, would be expected to be. There is a piece of the show that runs through Robbie, the teenage boy with eyeliner and a hoodie who serves as one of Wendy's early boyfriends and one of Dipper's most cartoonish rivals. Robbie writes songs. He performs them in the woods. He plays them on cassette. The episode in which he plays one such song for Wendy is, on its surface, a slightly cringeworthy piece of teen drama. Underneath it sits a piece of cipher. The song, when played backwards, contains a hidden command encoded in a piece of dialogue that, the show eventually reveals, has been planted in the song by Gideon, who is using Robbie as an unwitting agent to make Wendy fall in love with him. It is the show's first explicit engagement with the idea that mind control in Gravity Falls is not science fiction. It is layered into the audio of a teenager's love song. It is in the cassette tape Robbie plays. The implication, once you accept that, is large. If a child preacher can plant subliminal commands in a piece of pop music in Gravity Falls, then any piece of audio in town might be encoded. The radio in Stan's truck, the lullaby on Seuss's grandmother's tape recorder, the pop song playing in the diner. The implication reaches very deep very quickly, and the show, after the episode is over, lets it go. But the suggestion lingers in the background of every later scene with music. There is no scene in which a character is shown listening to music in this town that is not, for at least one viewer, slightly haunted by the question of who put the song there. There is also, woven through the show, a long-running thread about Stan's family beyond the brothers, and that thread is one of the show's smallest and most precise pieces of architecture. Stan and Ford had a brother who was never mentioned in the show itself, and the supplementary material makes that absence into a small piece of design. There is a great uncle who shows up in the show's family tree material, briefly, who never appears on screen. There is a niece who is never named who is Dipper and Mabel's mother. There is a mother, there is a father, there is an aunt who shows up only in shorts. The Pines family, as the show represents it, has more arms than the show ever shows you, that there are siblings off camera, that Dipper and Mabel have parents we hear by phone but never quite see, that the family is wider than the cabin. The show is, on this point, doing something deliberate. The audience never quite sees the parents because the audience is, in some sense, occupying the place the parents would have occupied. The cabin is, for one summer, a self-contained family. The bigger family is, for those weeks, off-screen. That choice has the effect of making the audience feel responsible for the cabin, in a way that having clearer parental figures would have softened. The show is keeping the parents off-screen because the show wants you, the viewer, to be the parent in the next room. It is one of the quietest pieces of audience design in the run. And while we are talking about absence, we should sit with one of the most painful absences in the show, which is the Pines family's grandparents on Stan's side. The show only ever gives us Philbrick and Ma Pines, the father and mother of Stan and Ford, in flashback. Philbrick is the man who threw Stan out of the house. Ma Pines, voiced in a single appearance, is a low-rent psychic who runs scams over a hotline. The Pines family has been running cons for at least 3 generations. The talent is hereditary. The brothers inherited it. The show treats Ma Pines' small scams as comic color, but it is also showing you exactly where Stan learned everything he knows. He was raised by a woman whose job was to lie to lonely people on the phone for money. He turned that skill, decades later, into a roadside attraction and used it to bring his brother home. The morally questionable family inheritance turned out, in the end, to be the thing that saved the world. There is no skill, the show argues, that is irredeemable. The con artist is also, sometimes, the only person willing to do what needs to be done. Stan saves the universe because his mother was a phone psychic. That is not a sentence anybody would write about another animated show. It is one of the truest sentences you can write about this one. The episode in which Stan runs for mayor is worth a longer look, because it is the show's most direct engagement with the conspiracy form, and because it does a piece of writing that is hard to find anywhere else on the network at the time. Stan runs for mayor of Gravity Falls, after the previous mayor dies during the events of an earlier episode, and his campaign is, at first, a comic disaster, until Dipper and Mabel discover that the only way Stan can win is if he is secretly controlled, in real time, through a device hidden in his necktie. The device is an earpiece that lets Dipper and Mabel feed Stan answers to debate questions from a control booth. The campaign works, Stan starts winning, and then, halfway through the episode, the show pulls a beautifully buried second twist. Gideon Gleeful, in his prison cell, has been listening in. Gideon has hijacked the signal. Gideon is, by the end of the episode, the one feeding Stan answers, using Stan as a meat puppet to deliver his political agenda to a town that has no idea its candidate is being puppeted by a small boy in a jail jumpsuit. The episode is the show's longest single look at how power actually works in a small town. The candidate is not the candidate. The candidate is whoever has access to the earpiece. The show is, in the most polite possible way, making an argument about media training and consultancies and the invisible voices that politicians at every level rely on. It is also showing you, with a fairly clean hand, what happens when a man who has spent his life telling lies for a living gets close to actual political power. He becomes legible to people much worse than him. He becomes an asset. Stan, having spent his life as the freelancer of his own grift, has become, briefly, somebody else's employee, and the show stages it as a small horror without ever quite saying so. He breaks free in the end. He loses the election. The episode plays the loss as a victory, which it is. It is the only honest version of a political ending that show could have written. Pacifica Northwest's arc is the show's longest exploration of a single secondary character, and it is its own quiet piece of writing about how children inherit conspiracies from their parents. Pacifica begins the show as a snobbish blonde girl who exists, in the language of the first season, to make Mabel feel bad about herself. She is the rich kid. She is the popular one. She has the silver spoon and the pony and the dismissive laugh. The first time we really meet her family is in the Northwest Mansion mystery, which we have already touched on, but it is worth returning to in the context of Pacifica specifically, because the episode does something with her that the show is rarely willing to do with a one-note antagonist. The episode shows us her parents abusing her, not physically, not loudly, but with a small bell that they ring to make her behave. She has been conditioned, like a dog, to certain postures and certain answers, and her parents pull the bell as casually as another father might rumple a child's hair. The episode is one of the most quietly horrifying single sequences in the show. Pacifica's whole personality, when you finally see her parents in action, becomes legible as a survival mechanism. The most unpleasant kid in town is unpleasant because somebody has been training her to be that way for her whole life. And the show, having shown you that, refuses to let her stay one note afterwards. She becomes, over the rest of the show, a tentative ally, then a friend, then somebody Dipper and Mabel actually choose to spend time with. By the apocalypse, she is fighting on the side of the good guys. The show does not redeem her with a single speech. It redeems her by showing you, very slowly, that she had to learn how to be a person, that her parents never taught her, and that the kids in town did. Underneath the Northwests is a family curse that is, in its own way, hereditary, passed to the daughter not by ghost but by a bell. And the daughter, by becoming friends with Dipper and Mabel, is the first Northwest in 150 years to break the loop. The town's other rich and famous figure, Toby Determined, the local newspaper editor, exists only as a piece of comic relief in the show, but he is, in his own small way, a piece of media commentary that the show drops in without underlining. Toby's newspaper, the Gravity Falls Gossiper, is single-sheet, hand-printed, and largely fictional. He invents stories. He invents quotes. He pursues his own delusions across town with a stenographer's pad and a permanent slouch. Toby is the show's version of the small-town press in general, a man with no editor and no accountability, who shapes what the town believes for an audience of about 40 subscribers. He is largely harmless. He is also, in the show's own writing, a perfect demonstration of how local conspiracy theories actually form. A man with a deadline and no facts becomes, over time, the historical record of his town. Toby is the show's small joke about all of that. He is also, in passing, one of the few characters in town not raised by the Pines family or one of its proxies, and he is therefore part of the show's larger ecological argument about who runs Gravity Falls. The mayor's office, the journalism, the police, the school, the tourist trap, the lake monster, the gnomes, all of them are, in the show's economy, run by people who are not really qualified to run them. The town is held together by a kind of generous incompetence at every level. On the show's reading, this is a feature of small towns generally. The systems are propped up by people who have not been formally trained and who would be horrified to be told they are not actually qualified. Gravity Falls works because the people in it have agreed to pretend it works. That is, in the most polite possible way, a piece of social commentary. Dipper, who is the show's center of gravity in most of the early episodes, has a small private gag of his own, and it is one of the show's longest-running Easter eggs. His real name is not Dipper. The show plays this for a joke through almost the entire run. Dipper is a nickname, given to him by his sister because of the constellation of moles on his forehead that resemble the Big Dipper. The show makes a recurring gag out of the way Dipper hates his real name. He insists, all the way through the run, that anybody who finds out the name has to swear never to use it. Mabel, in the final season, blackmails Stan with it. There is an entire side plot in the show in which a wax statue of an author finds out Dipper's real name and is killed before he can reveal it. The show has, very deliberately, kept it off-screen for the entire run. Off-screen, in interviews, in supplementary materials, Hirsch has revealed that Dipper's real name is Mason. That single piece of information is part of the show's broader habit. The show withheld a tiny piece of biography from the audience for the entire run and gave it to the audience only after the show was over, in interviews and in books. That is, on its own scale, a piece of the show's design philosophy, the same one we keep returning to. There is always one more piece behind the page. Even the lead character's name is, in some technical sense, locked behind a soft paywall of the show's own merchandise. That is the kind of decision that, looked at one way, is mildly annoying, and looked at another way, is part of why fans still find new things in the show a decade later. The show keeps its lockboxes locked even after the show is over. There is a piece of the show's lore that arrived years after the show ended and that has, in the most recent stretch of fandom, become its own engine of fresh theory, which is the Book of Bill. It is a hardcover book, sold in stores, framed as a memoir or a manual written by Bill Cipher himself, designed in part by Hirsch and the original show's art team, full of ciphers and rebuses and trick pages, and the same kind of paranoid voice that the show used. The book was not strictly canon when it came out. Hirsch, in interviews, treated it as ambiguous, as a piece of the world, but a piece written in Bill's voice, which by definition meant it could lie. The book includes references to other dimensions, to other characters, to a far future of Gravity Falls that the show itself did not have time to dramatize. It explicitly leaves the door open for Bill to return. It contains, depending on which reader you ask, either a confession or a trick. The book is a piece of fiction the show has placed inside the show's own universe, written by the show's own villain, and the readers are being asked to trust a narrator who has spent 2 seasons demonstrating that he cannot be trusted. The book is a very long way of asking, in the gentlest possible voice, whether you would let Bill back into your dimension. It also serves, in a more practical sense, as a kind of post-finale playground in which Hirsch can revisit characters and unresolved threads without committing the original show to anything new. Pieces of the book have been quoted, debated, frame-stepped through, and run through every cipher the fandom knows, and many of the secrets in it remain, as of this recording, unresolved. The Book of Bill is, in summary, the show kept going after it ended, just under the surface of merchandise, in a register that only the most attentive readers have caught up with. There is also a published graphic novel called Lost Legends that came out a few years after the show ended, containing 4 short stories set during the show's run, each one drawn by a different artist, and each one filling in a small corner of the world the show did not have time to cover. Lost Legends is, on one level, a tie-in product. On another, it is the show's writers walking back through the building and filling in the rooms they did not finish painting. The 4 stories each tell a small contained mystery that ends in the same key the show ended in, ranging from a piece of cursed merchandise to an adventure underneath the Northwest Mansion, to a Mabel-centered misadventure, to a Gravity Falls hockey team tall tale. The show, even in its supplementary material, kept refusing to flatten out. The book does not pretend that the show's universe has been fully mapped. It just adds a few more dots to the map. The graphic novel was, for a time, the only major piece of new canon, and for a while, fans treated it as the official last word. The Book of Bill, which came out later, complicates that, because Lost Legends and the Book of Bill are not always in agreement, and the show now has, in effect, a kind of competing supplementary canon between the official tie-in graphic novel and the unreliably narrated villain memoir. The most interesting piece of all is the disagreement itself. The show has a writer. The writer is alive. The writer can clarify any of these matters in an interview at any time, and he largely refuses to. The result is that the show's canon, more than a decade after the show ended, is a series of overlapping documents that the writer is deliberately keeping in slight tension. That is the kind of authorship most television properties do not get to have. The Gravity Falls of the show is not the Gravity Falls of the books, is not the Gravity Falls of the Cipher Hunt, is not the Gravity Falls of the Book of Bill. They are all real, and they are all in slight conflict, and the writer is content to leave it that way. There is one episode in particular that, structurally, is the moral center of the entire second season, and it is worth pausing on, because it is the show's longest single statement about what it thinks growing up looks like. Dipper and Mabel versus the Future is the episode in which Mabel is told, by Dipper, that she does not have to be afraid of growing up, and in which she realizes she very much is, and in which she runs into the woods and ends up captured by Bill. The episode is constructed almost entirely around the small, everyday horror of a child realizing, for the first time, that childhood ends. Dipper is offered by Ford an apprenticeship. Ford wants Dipper to stay in Gravity Falls. Ford wants Dipper to be the next author. He offers it to Dipper not as a fantasy, but as a serious, concrete proposition. He explains the work. He explains the cost. He offers a teaching role with full conviction. And Dipper, the boy who has spent the entire show wanting exactly this, says yes. That yes is, in the show's logic, the first betrayal Dipper has made of his sister. Mabel, eavesdropping at a door, hears the proposition and hears the answer, and the door closes on the version of the summer she had been holding together. The episode then turns on Mabel's panic, on her search for one last day of summer, on her capture by Bill, on her placement inside the bubble that we already discussed. The show is willing, in its second season, to admit that the bond between the twins is also a kind of contract, and that the contract is breaking, slowly, all by itself, and that nobody in the show is the villain of that contract breaking. It is just time. Time is doing it. Bill is, in this episode, a kind of opportunist, a creature that smells the emotional disruption of a growing-up sibling pair and arrives to take advantage. You do not need a supernatural villain to break a sibling relationship. Time does it. The triangle just arrives to clean up the mess. This is the show's quietest and saddest piece of writing. The apocalypse does not start because Bill is powerful. The apocalypse starts because two siblings could no longer agree on what summer was for. That episode is also one of the most quietly shot pieces of the entire run. The animators slow down, the color palette dulls. Mabel's hair gets messier. Dipper's expressions get tighter. The animation, in places, looks like it is doing the work of slowing down time itself. The team knew this episode was the one. Hirsch has spoken in interviews about the way the show's design got more careful in the back half of Season 2, about how the team gave themselves more time on character beats, about how moments of physical stillness were drawn at higher detail than the show usually allowed. The show is, by the second season, refusing to behave like a Disney XD cartoon in the moments it cares about most. It is, in those moments, drawing itself like a feature film. The writers and the artists, knowing they only had 2 seasons to work with, used that constraint to apply a kind of pressure to every frame they cared about. There is no padded episode in the second half of the second season. There are no filler beats. Every frame is doing work. That is, on its own, one of the reasons the show feels more like a contained novel than a syndicated cartoon. It was made by people who knew the ending was already on the calendar. There is also one strange and slightly cursed piece of the show's geography we have not addressed, and that is the Stano War, the boat whose name began with a toy the brothers built as children and is given again to the full-sized vessel they sail off on at the end of the show. The Stano War is, in flashback, the small toy boat the brothers play with on the beach. In the show's present day, Ford has been working on a real version of it during gaps in the apocalypse, and after Stan's memories return, the two of them take it out together to sail the world looking for anomalies. The boat is, in the show's emotional logic, the symbol of the brothers' original promise. They were going to be explorers together, They were going to find things together. Life pulled them apart. The toy sat in storage. The new boat, at the end of the show, is finally launched. Even after the apocalypse and the memory loss and the 30 years on the other side of the portal, the show gives the brothers the thing they wanted in the first place. They get the boat, they get the trip, they get each other. The show is willing, very gently, to let two characters in their 60s finally start the journey their childhood selves planned. That is, in the most literal possible way, a happy ending. The Stan War is the show being willing to give somebody one. While Stan and Ford sail away, the show also lets us see what becomes of everybody else, in a kind of final montage that doubles as a small piece of writing about how endings actually work. Seuss becomes the new Mr. Mystery, taking over the shack, putting on a fez, learning Stan's patter, marrying Melody, becoming the kind of father figure to the next generation of summer visitors that Stan was for him. Wendy makes plans for college. Mabel and Dipper, on their 13th birthday at the end of the summer, get on a bus and go home. The shot of them on the bus, holding hands as the town disappears behind them, is one of the most quietly devastating final shots in any animated series, because the show does not pretend, for even a single frame, that the summer is going to come back. It is over. The kids are going home. They will visit, the show implies, but the summer they had this year will not happen again in this shape. The show is willing to let the audience grieve. Most cartoons aimed at this age range do not give you that beat. Most cartoons hand you a feeling of well-being and send you on your way. Gravity Falls hands you the bus station and the bus and the older selves looking out the window, and it trusts you to feel what you feel. That is a quietly radical piece of writing. It is also, more than anything else in the run, the reason the show stuck with the people who watched it as children. Those children grew up. They watched the show again as teenagers and as adults. They watched the final episode at 24 with a different set of memories than they had at 12. The show, in those moments, holds up. It is not nostalgia. It is an artifact built to be reread. The writers knew you would be watching it again in 10 years, and they made it for the older you. There are mysteries the show never closes, and any fair list of Gravity Falls puzzles has to include them on their own terms, because they are part of the show's signature. The show never gives you a complete origin story for Bill Cipher beyond the implications. The show never explains, on screen, what created the boundary around the town, or why the town has the gravity quirk it is named for. The show never explains who, if anyone, is the source of the cosmic order that the Time Baby was upholding. The show never explains the full meaning of certain symbols that appear in the background art across multiple episodes, including one symbol that appears in the wallpaper of the shack from the very first episode, and that has never been decoded. The show never explains the small flickering lights in certain night scenes. The show never explains who, if anyone, sent Stanford the original letter that brought him to Gravity Falls. There are pieces of the journals visible on screen, in single frames, that contain references to creatures and events the show never returns to. The unanswered question is part of the texture of the world. A show that answered all of its mysteries would not be Gravity Falls. The town has more weirdness in it than 2 seasons could ever hold, and that surplus is, in itself, a kind of generosity to the audience. You can return to the show, every viewing, and find a question you had not asked before, and the show is not in a rush to answer it for you. Some shows close their loops. Gravity Falls leaves some open on purpose. The decision to leave them open is, on its own, an act of confidence in the audience. There is also the question of where the show fits in the larger story of animation, and that question is, in its way, a small piece of the show's broader life. Gravity Falls came out at a particular moment in television history, in the years when single creator-driven animated shows were starting to be allowed, by major networks, to tell long-form stories with continuity. Adventure Time was running. Steven Universe was about to begin. The conditions under which a Disney property could be allowed to have an actual ending were, for the first time in a long time, in place. Hirsch took advantage of those conditions and made a show that could only have existed in that window. A few years earlier, Disney would not have agreed to let him end the show on his own terms. A few years later, the show might have been forced to expand into more seasons than its writers wanted. Gravity Falls arrived in the small open door of a particular moment and walked through it. The show is, in some sense, an accident of scheduling, that it caught a window of corporate permission that has, in many ways, already closed. There are very few shows now that are allowed to end the way Gravity Falls ended. The networks have, in the years since, gotten more nervous about cutting a property short, while it still has audience. Gravity Falls might be one of the last shows of its kind to be given the dignity of a planned final episode. That is, on its own, a piece of small television history, and the show is, in its very existence, a piece of evidence that this can be done. There is a piece of the show that, at the deepest reading, is harder to name, and it is the one I want to spend a little time on before we turn toward the close. The show is, in its bones, a piece of writing about the end of childhood. The supernatural is the dressing. The cipher hunt is the dressing. The triangle in the dream is the dressing. Underneath all of it is a single argument that summer ends, that being a child ends, that the version of yourself who looked forward to summer ends, and that the only thing you can do is be there for the people you loved during that ending. The show is, in the most direct possible reading, a love story between two siblings during the last summer of their shared childhood. Everything else is the show's way of dramatizing that loss without saying so. The triangle is the loss, the portal is the loss, the 30 years of absence are the loss, the memory gun is the loss. Even Stan's recovery, the slow montage of photographs returning his memories, is a piece of the same argument. You can lose everything inside your own head, the show says, and you can be brought back, slowly, by the people who love you and who refuse to let you stay gone. That is the show's bedrock. The decorative mysteries are decorative, the grief is the building, and the writing on the surface, the dialogue and the jokes and the running gags and the action sequences are the show's way of letting you sit in that grief without being asked to admit you are doing it. That is, on its own, a piece of writing craft that very few children's shows have ever attempted, and Gravity Falls is, in this respect, almost in a category of its own. The other thing the show does, and that is worth marking before we wind down, is that it treats its small ensemble of secondary characters with the kind of care that most shows reserve for their leads. Tate McTavish, the boat builder who is Old Man McGucket's son, gets one episode of the show and one quiet scene, and that scene is enough to give him an entire arc. Tate has spent his whole adult life trying not to be his father, has built himself a small, respectable boat rental business in town, and has refused to even acknowledge his father's existence for years, until the events of the Gobblewonker episode force him to confront the fact that his father has been trying, in his own broken way, to communicate with him through robots. The surface story is that a robotic lake monster is being piloted by an old man trying to get his son's attention. Underneath it is the harder one. Adult children of mentally unwell parents often spend most of their lives trying to escape, and the escape is, on some level, never complete. The show makes that argument inside one episode about a fake monster. There is no easy resolution. Tate does not reconcile with his father at the end of the episode. He just stands on the dock, looking at the lake, holding the wrench he used to pull his father's robot apart. The show trusts you to feel what that means without explaining it. That is a piece of writing economy that I would compare favorably to almost any literary short story I have read, and Hirsch and his team do it inside a Disney XD half-hour, with a singing fish in the background of the same scene. It is, in its own way, a small miracle. There is a piece of background detail in the Mystery Shack that, when you start looking at it, becomes one of the show's quietest visual touches, and that is the matter of what is on the walls. The Mystery Shack is full of objects: taxidermy, old fishing reels, license plates, bottle openers, tools, pictures of relatives nobody mentions. The show's art department, over 2 seasons, slowly populated the walls of the shack with a kind of generational scrapbook. Some of the objects are jokes, some are sight gags, and some, the show implies in a few quiet shots, are real artifacts from Stan's life. There is a photograph behind the desk that, in the 2nd season, we finally understand is Stanford. There is a framed picture in the kitchen of a woman who, the show implies in passing, was once important to Stan. There is a small carved figure on a shelf that looks, if you squint, exactly like the boat the brothers built as children. The show treated the shack as a memory palace, and almost every object on every wall is a piece of somebody's life. And the show, over 40 episodes, was slowly placing those objects so that the camera could find them later. That is a kind of long-range art direction that is hard to do on a tight schedule. Hirsch and his team did it. The shack is, in the end, not just a setting. It is a kind of biography in objects. The walls have, in their production design, the same patience with detail that the writing has. Everything in the room is there for a reason. Some of those reasons will not be visible to you until a 3rd or 4th viewing of the show. There is a small pattern of numbers running through the show that is worth a moment of attention. The number 8, in particular, recurs across the entire run. There is the 8-ball Stan keeps in his desk drawer. There are 8 symbols in some early versions of the wheel. There is the 8.5 president. There are 8 items, by some viewer counts, that the show paints in close-up at Greasy's diner. The number 12 also recurs, partly because the twins are 12, partly because the show is structured around the 12 weeks of summer break, partly because the journals have 12 major chapters according to material outside the show. The number 3 is of course central, because of the 3 journals and the 3 brothers in the founding generation. None of these number patterns are addressed openly in the show. They appear in the art and in the writing as background. The show is, like the journals themselves, written in a series of small repeating motifs that the audience absorbs without quite naming. The repetition is the point. The show is teaching you to look at every frame on a level your conscious brain does not notice. A jacket with 8 buttons in one scene, a pin with a triangle in another, a glass with 3 rings on it. None of this is required reading. All of it is there. The show is a piece of design as much as it is a piece of writing, and that design rewards a kind of attention that very few television shows bother to ask for. The pine tree on Dipper's hat is itself a small detail that deserves a small detour. The hat is, in the first season, the cheap souvenir hat that Mabel buys for her brother on their second day in town. He puts it on. He never takes it off. By the second season, the hat is, in effect, his face. The pine tree on the front of the hat appears, separately, as one of the symbols on the wheel. The same symbol appears on a stained glass window in an early episode. The same symbol appears in a different color on the cover of one of the journals. The symbol predates Dipper. He has, by chance or by design, picked up a hat that has, at some unknown point in the past, become a piece of cosmic shorthand. The show never explains how that happened. The implication, on a careful reading, is that the wheel and its symbols are older than any of the people in town, that the symbols existed first, and that the people who wear them are slotting into roles that the universe has already prepared. That reading turns the wheel from a piece of plot mechanics into a piece of theology. The people are not chosen by their hats. The hats are chosen by them. The show, very deliberately, never makes you commit to that reading. You can hold it or not. The show is willing to let you turn the question over for the rest of your life. There is also a small piece of Gravity Falls that gets less attention than it should, and that is the question of where Stan keeps his money. The show makes a running joke of the fact that Stan is constantly in debt, constantly scrambling for cash, and yet, somehow, the lights stay on. The shack pays, the kids eat, the portal gets built. Stan, the show implies in passing, runs a series of small grifts, side businesses, fake auctions, and backroom deals that, in their aggregate, keep the shack alive. He sells fake antiques. He sells one-of-a-kind merchandise. He runs raffles. He sells admission tickets that are also lottery tickets. He pretends to be different identities to scam the same customers twice. The show plays it for laughs. It is also, when you look at it directly, a portrait of how small business operators in America actually keep the doors open. Stan is not, in this sense, an unrealistic character. He is one of the more realistic small business operators in any cartoon. The show, in its broader sympathy, is on his side. It does not lecture you about his grifts. It does not punish him for them. It treats them as the cost of survival in a country that does not look out for men like him. That is, on its own, a small piece of class writing inside a children's cartoon. It is not underlined, it is just there. There is, finally, a thing the show does at the very end that we have not addressed, and that is the show's commitment to letting the audience leave. The final episode closes on a quiet beat. There is no cliffhanger. There is no tease for a sequel series. There is no last-second appearance of a new villain. The show, in the most unfashionable way available to it, closes its own door. The credits roll. The little flashes of Cipher and Easter egg that ran through every prior episode's credits are still there, but they are smaller. The show is, very gently, telling you to leave. Hirsch refused, on principle, to leave the show in the position of being able to come back. He could have left a thread. He chose not to. The show has continued, in books and in supplementary material, but the original cartoon series, the one that aired on Disney XD between 2012 and 2016, is finished. It is a complete object. You can hold it in your hand. You can finish it and put it on the shelf. That is, in the world of episodic television, an increasingly rare thing. Gravity Falls is, in this respect, a kind of artisanal piece of work, finished by its own writer to its own terms. Underneath every other piece of this list is the fact that the show closed its own door, and that the door has stayed closed, on the writer's preference, despite many years of fan pressure to reopen it. The fact that Hirsch has resisted that pressure, even as he has continued to play in the world through books, is part of why the show feels finished in a way other shows of its era do not. It earned its ending. It kept it. We can hold one more piece of context before we close, which is the question of why the show holds the place in pop culture that it does. Gravity Falls aired on a Disney-owned children's channel in the years between 2012 and 2016, against significant competition, with relatively little promotional support in its first season, and it became, by its second season, one of the most loved animated shows of the decade. Fans cosplay as the characters at conventions a decade after the show ended. Fan art continues to be made. Fan analysis continues to be published. There are college courses, by now, that use the show as a case study in long-form animated storytelling. The Book of Bill, when it was published, was a New York Times bestseller. The Cipher Hunt has its own documentary footage that fans still re-upload. The show has become, in a real way, a kind of foundational text for the generation that grew up with it. The staying power comes from the same place we have been circling all night. The show was made by people who took their work and their audience seriously. It is not a piece of children's television that condescends to children. It is a piece of children's television that respects them enough to write at the edge of their understanding and to trust them to catch up. That respect, more than the ciphers, more than the wheel, more than the triangles in the wallpaper, is the thing that has carried the show forward through a decade of changing taste. The show treats its audience as intelligent. The audience has stayed. Before we close, I want to walk through one more piece of the show that gets less attention than it deserves, and that is the recurring motif of the eye. The eye in the triangle, the eye on the back of the journal, the eye on the eye bats, the eye in McGucket's symbol when he was a society member, the eye in the wax statue of one of the founders, the eye in certain stained glass in the mansion, the eye in 1,000 background frames. The eye is, in the show's symbolic economy, the most loaded image. It means watching. It means knowing. It means seeing things you were not meant to see. And in almost every case in the show, the eye belongs to Bill, or to people Bill has touched. The Society of the Blind Eye, by contrast, take their name from the absence of the eye. They are the people who, having seen too much, decided to stop seeing. The show is, in this single image, arguing two things at once. The first is that being seen, by certain kinds of intelligence, is a violation. The second is that refusing to see, in retreat from that violation, is also a violation. The Society of the Blind Eye are the wrong kind of survivor. Bill is the wrong kind of observer. The right relationship to seeing, the show argues, is the one Stanford eventually arrives at after the apocalypse. You look, you take notes, you write it down, you share it with the people who love you. You let the journals become collaborative documents. You let the next generation read what you wrote. The eye, in the end, is about how to live with knowing things. The show is one of the only children's properties that has bothered to make that question its central concern. It is a hard question. The show does not pretend to have a clean answer. It just dramatizes the wrong answers, in detail, and points at the right direction. The right direction, in the show's logic, is collaborative. The journals stop being secret. The wheel stops being a single person's notebook. Ford, after the apocalypse, hands the journals over. The shack opens its doors. Seuss takes over. The next generation runs the place. Mabel and Dipper, on the bus, take pieces of the summer home with them. Underneath every other point on this list, the show is making a soft argument for openness as the response to a closed world. The town survived because, in the end, the secrets were shared. The brothers reconciled because, in the end, the silence broke. The triangle was defeated because, in the end, the man inside Stan's head was the man Stan trusted enough to let into his mind. The memory gun is a piece of plot mechanics. The actual weapon is the relationship that allowed Stan to volunteer his own brain. There is no mystery in Gravity Falls that survives a real conversation between two of its characters. The mysteries are powered by silence. The show ends because the silence ends. That is, in the end, the show's most important argument to name, and it is the one I want you to take away with you. There is one final piece of texture I want to add before we close, And that is the way the show writes its supporting cast. The people who appear in a scene or two and then never come back. The people who are walking past in the background. The people who are crowd. The town of Gravity Falls, by the end of the show, has, according to fan compilations, somewhere between 40 and 70 named background characters, almost all of them voiced by the small core ensemble of voice actors at the show. Each of them has, in fan databases, a name. Each of them, the show implies in passing, has a small story. The diner waitress with the beehive, the man at the grocery store with a small bear, the woman who keeps llamas, the school principal, the deputy, the bus driver. The supporting cast are real in the show's economy. They are not just population, they are people the show has bothered to design. When Weirdmageddon arrives and they are turned to stone, the show takes the time to show you certain of their petrified faces, mid-scream, in shots that linger longer than they would have to. The show is, in those shots, making a small statement about what is being lost. It is not just the leads. It is the diner waitress. It is the man with the bear. It is the woman with the llamas. The show is, on some level, a portrait of a town, not just a portrait of a family. And the town has weight, precisely because the show was willing to spend time on people who would not have been counted in a less generous piece of writing. That generosity is part of what makes the apocalypse hit the way it hits. The show has shown you, week after week, that these people are people. So when they freeze, you feel it. And then, finally, the show closes. The bus pulls away. The twins look out the back window. The shack stands in the woods behind them. Seuss is in the fez. Stan and Ford are out at sea. Wendy is on her way to whatever comes next. Pacifica has changed. McGucket has his memory back. The town, behind them, is going to be okay. Or at least the version of okay that this town is capable of. The show ends with a single quiet shot of the symbol of the wheel, holding for a beat longer than necessary, and then fading to black. The show is willing to fade. It is not afraid of the credits. It is not afraid of being a finite object. It is willing to be a thing that happened, in 2 seasons and 40 episodes, between 2012 and 2016, made by a small team of people who knew exactly what they were doing, finished, signed, set on a shelf. That is, in the larger economy of television, a rare and beautiful thing. The show is finished. The show is also still alive in the imagination of the people who watched it. Both of those things are true at once. That is, in the end, what art is for. The show does the work, lets the audience pick it up, and lets the audience carry it. The mysteries persist because the audience continues to ask the questions. The show does not have to answer them in order for them to keep mattering. If you have stayed with me this far, you have probably already noticed that the conspiracies in Gravity Falls all rhyme. The Mystery Shack is a fake on top of a real machine. The journals are field notes hiding a weapon. The town's founder is a lie covering a real lunatic. The local rich family is a forged dynasty covering a curse. The local crank is a genius covering grief. The local con man is a savior covering a brother. The local cartoon triangle is, somehow, the only honest figure in the room, because he tells you, in plain language, that he wants the world to end, and most everybody else in the show is wearing a mask. The texture of the show is that the things that look honest are usually masks, and the things that look like masks are usually honest. That is, on a quieter reading, the texture of any town anyone has ever lived in. Every small town has a mystery shack. Every small town has a society of the blind eye. Every small town has a Northwest mansion. Every small town has a child preacher. Every small town has a barefoot lunatic in the junkyard who turns out, on closer reading, to be the wisest person on the block. The show is, in some sense, a guide to noticing those things in your own town. That is the show's most generous reading. It is also the one I think is true. There is, before I let us land, one more piece of the show I want to walk through, and that is the way Bill himself talks. Bill's dialogue is, in the show's writing, one of the most consistent pieces of characterization in the run. He speaks in short, declarative bursts. He gives nicknames to almost everybody. Dipper is Pine Tree, Mabel is Shooting Star, Seuss is Question Mark, Ford is Sixer, Pacifica is Llama, Gideon is Star, McGucket is Glasses, Wendy is Ice. The nicknames map directly to the symbols of the wheel. He sees people as symbols already. He does not deal in faces. He deals in shapes. That is, in the show's logic, exactly why he is dangerous. To a creature that sees only symbols, a human being is interchangeable with the icon on their hat. He does not actually love or hate any of them. He only catalogs them. That makes him the worst possible negotiating partner, because he cannot be persuaded by anything that requires him to actually see who you are. The shape on your hat is the shape on your hat. That is the entire content of the relationship as far as he is concerned. Bill is, in the most precise possible way, the show's image of what it looks like to treat people as data. He is an algorithm with a top hat. The show does not draw the comparison explicitly. The show was made before most of the modern conversation about algorithms had its current shape, but the writing holds up. Bill is, with the benefit of a decade of hindsight, the closest thing the show has to a portrait of how it feels to be reduced to your own demographic profile by a system that does not actually care which one you are. There is also a quieter piece of his speech I want to flag, which is that, even when Bill is at his most jovial, his lines are full of micro-confessions about what he is. He tells you, in passing, that he has done this before. He tells you, in passing, that he comes from somewhere else. He tells you, in passing, that there is a list of people he is in trouble with. He drops, in a single line in one of the Season 2 episodes, the suggestion that he has burned down at least one other dimension already. The show writes him as the kind of villain who is, in his own way, completely honest about his own nature, because his honesty is itself a piece of his power. He does not lie about wanting to end the world. He lies about how soon. He does not lie about being from another place. He lies about what that place looked like. He is, in his own self-assessment, an artist. He is proud of his work. He wants you to know what he did. He wants to be admired by the people he is about to destroy. That is also, on a careful reading, the model the show is offering of a certain kind of charismatic villain in the real world. The show is too polite to draw the parallel directly. The parallel does the work anyway. There is also the matter of the color palette, because the show, more than most, uses color as a kind of language. Mabel is pink and bright and sweater patterns. Dipper is blue and brown and small clean shapes. Stan is gray and red and the deep brown of old wood. Ford is reds and tans and the color of weather-worn leather. Bill is yellow, and his yellow gets more aggressive as the show progresses, until, by the apocalypse, his yellow is the color of the sky itself. The show is writing in two languages at once. The first language is the dialogue. The second language is the color. Mabel and Dipper are always, even in the same shot, color-coded in ways that the writing reinforces. When Mabel is on screen, the saturation goes up. When Dipper is on screen, the saturation goes down a notch. When they are together, you can see the show resolving a small chromatic argument in real time. The show is, in some sense, a piece of design as much as it is a piece of writing, and the design is doing the same work as the dialogue. Mabel is the part of the show that is bright. Dipper is the part of the show that is dim. The bond between them, the show is arguing in color, is what keeps both of them visible. One piece I have not touched is the way the show handles Bill's stone form at the end. Once Stan's memory has erased Bill from his mind, Bill is, in the show's terms, fossilized. He turns to a statue. The statue is left in the forest, in the woods around Gravity Falls, exactly where he stood when he was killed. The show, in its final montage, cuts to that statue, in passing, for a single beat. The statue is still standing. The trees have not grown around it yet. The show is, deliberately, leaving Bill in the world. He is not destroyed, he is just frozen. The implication, very lightly held, is that something could, in theory, change. The Cipher hunt, which we discussed earlier, took that statue out into the real world and turned it into a physical object in a forest. That is, in a sense, the most literal piece of fan participation any television show has ever invited. The statue is a place. The statue is a destination. The statue is a piece of pilgrimage. The show was willing, even in its own final shot, to leave the door cracked, to let the audience choose what to do with the cracking. Some endings are about closing the door. Some endings are about leaving it just barely open and trusting the audience to know what to do with the air coming through. Gravity Falls chose the second. That is, in itself, one of the bravest pieces of writing on the show. It is also the reason the show is, in some sense, still being written, by the people who keep coming back to find one more thing. We can pause and take stock for a moment. We have walked through the mystery shack, the brothers, the journals, the entity inside the dream, the cult that built itself to forget, the family that lied itself into a dynasty, the 8.5 president, the agents in dark glasses, the boy in the powder blue suit, the office of time, the wheel of 10, the moment the villain entered the boy, the man who walked out of the portal, the apocalypse, the bubble of permanent summer, the kitchen table where the only weapon that worked was a brother, the recovery scrapbook, the cipher under the dying line, the real-world hunt that followed, the layered codes in the credits, the supplementary books, the off-camera relationships, the absent grandparents, the political campaign with 2 earpieces, the daughter trained by a bell, the small-town newspaper editor with no editor, the hidden middle name of the lead character, the boat the brothers built as children and finished as old men, the ending nobody dared to undo, the design philosophy that left every door cracked, the sister inspiration behind the writing, the writer with 3 voices in his throat, the color palette as a parallel script, the language of nicknames, the slow petrification of a small triangle in a forest. That is a lot of small mysteries for one show. That is a lot of small mysteries for one summer. There are more we did not have time to walk through tonight. There are episodes I did not name. There are creatures I did not name. There are dialogue beats and animation choices and storyboard frames and credit sequences I did not have time to mention. The show is, in its very design, deeper than any one essay can fully describe. That is part of the show's gift. You can keep going. You can keep finding things. There is always one more piece behind the page. There is one thing I want to do before the outro, which is to circle back to the bond between the twins, because the show is, in its very bottom, a piece of writing about that bond, and I do not want to leave us before we have sat with it for a few minutes, the way the show sits with it. Dipper and Mabel are, on paper, opposites. He is anxious, she is loud. He is small and thoughtful and rule-following. She is bright and impulsive and breaks the rules without asking. He is, by temperament, the kid in the basement. She is, by temperament, the kid on the roof. The show, in its first season, plays the dynamic as a comic odd couple, but it does it with a kind of background sweetness that the audience absorbs without naming. They share a room, they share a wardrobe in the cabin, they share a single beat in every episode in which one of them comforts the other, even when they have spent the rest of the episode at odds. The show, in its first season, is teaching you the shape of a healthy sibling relationship, in case you missed the lesson elsewhere. They argue, they forgive, they tease, they protect, they show up. That is the model. The show puts it in front of you in cartoon shorthand because the show knows that the audience watching it includes children who, for various reasons, may not have seen that model up close. There is a piece of cultural service in there. The show is offering, in passing, a piece of relational education that the show itself does not announce. The show just shows you what it looks like and lets you absorb it. In the second season, the show puts that bond under increasing pressure. Mabel feels Dipper drifting from her. Dipper feels Mabel pulling him back from things he wants to do. The two of them are negotiating, in the most natural way possible, the actual problem of growing up in a pair. The show makes a quiet argument that this kind of negotiation does not have to be a fight, that there is a way to do it in which both siblings end the conversation still on each other's side, and that the way involves saying out loud the things you are afraid of saying. Mabel does that, eventually, in the bubble. Dipper does that, eventually, on the bus. Neither of them does it perfectly. Both of them get it mostly right. The show is, in its second season, making the case that growing up in a pair is a piece of long work, and that the work is worth doing, and that there is no clean exit from it. The show is, in some sense, the most romantic thing on television aimed at its age group, and the romance is between a brother and a sister. That is a kind of love story most networks would not have known how to make. Gravity Falls knew how to make it. It is, in many ways, the most important love story in the show. Everything else in the cast is, in some way, a variation on it. Stan and Ford are a damaged adult version of the same bond. Pacifica and her parents are a broken parental version of it. Seuss and his grandmother are a chosen and adopted version of it. The show is, all the way down, a series of essays on what it looks like when one person decides to be there for another person. The twins are the center. Everybody else is a reflection. There is, finally, one piece of the show's storytelling we should sit with for a beat before we close, which is the way it handles the figure of the older relative. Stan, by every external measure, should not have been a good guardian. He is broke. He is criminal. He lies for a living. He is, when the kids arrive, already in his 60s, alone in a cabin in the woods, dealing with cosmic trauma he has not told anyone about. By any conventional measure, The parents in the show's off-screen first scene should not have sent their 12-year-old children to him. The show is fully aware of this. The show, in its first few episodes, is playing the joke of the unsuitable guardian for laughs. Over 40 episodes, the show makes the case that the formal qualifications were never the point. Stan loves the kids. He says so, in his own way, in his own time. He shows up for them. He puts himself between them and the worst thing in the universe, and lets that thing into his own brain so it cannot reach them. The show is, in passing, making an argument for the chosen elder. The man who, by the rules, should not have been the one, is, by the actual events, exactly the one. That is, on its own, a piece of writing that has comforted a certain kind of viewer in a way that very few shows of this size have. There are a lot of people who watched Gravity Falls as kids who, for reasons of their own, needed exactly that argument from a piece of television. The show gave it to them. That is, on its own scale, a public service. It is the quietest piece of the show, because it does not look like a piece of writing at all. It looks like a story about a tourist trap, and a triangle, and a summer that ends. Underneath, it is the show saying, very quietly, that the people who show up are the people who count, and that the rest of the rules can be argued with later. So that is, more or less, what we know. There are pieces I have skipped. There are episodes I gestured at without describing in full. There are background characters I named only in passing. There are ciphers I did not decode for you because the show itself prefers you decode them yourself. There are pieces of the supplementary material I left out because they are, on a fair reading, outside the strict boundary of what the show itself was willing to put on screen. The show is bigger than any one essay can hold. I have done my best, tonight, to walk you through the largest and the smallest of the mysteries the show built into itself, and to be honest with you about which pieces are canon, and which pieces are theory, and which pieces live in the supplementary material that came afterwards. I have tried not to invent anything. I have tried not to pretend a piece of theory was a fact. I have tried to keep faith with the show by being as careful with my reading of it as the show was with its own writing. It is a strange show to look back on, this many years later. It aired between 2012 and 2016 on Disney Channel and then Disney XD in 2 seasons, for a total of 40 episodes plus shorts, and it ended exactly when its writer wanted it to end. In the years since, it has become a kind of foundational text for a generation of animators and viewers, an early proof that long-form mystery storytelling could be done inside a Disney-owned children's network, and a piece of evidence that, when you trust your audience, the audience tends to return the favor. There are very few shows of its size that have lasted in the imagination the way Gravity Falls has lasted. There are even fewer that have managed to do it without coming back. The show has not come back. The show has continued, in books and in supplementary materials and in the Cipher Hunt and in the Book of Bill, but the original cartoon series has not been revived. It is, in this strange way, a closed loop. The summer happened, the summer ended, the kids went home on the bus, the shack is in the hands of the right person, the boat is on the water, the triangle is in the woods, frozen, watching, and the audience, somewhere, is rewatching it again. That is, in the end, the largest pattern of all, the one that has nothing to do with Bill and everything to do with the way a piece of television, made carefully, by people who cared, can keep being alive in the people who watched it long after the writers have gone home. The show is finished. The show is also, somehow, still happening, in the rewatches and the rereads and the slow, careful study of the credits. That is the kind of life only a piece of art that respected its audience ever gets to have. If you have made it this far, thank you for letting me walk through this with you. I hope it helped you settle in. I hope the small details and the big mysteries and the gentle thread of the brothers and the twins did the work tonight that this channel was built to do. Gravity Falls is, in the end, a piece of writing about summer, and about siblings, and about the